Hello, YouTube and internet, and whoever is watching at this time of day and or night, wherever you may be. Welcome back to the Comics and Stuff YouTube channel. My name is Devin. I am your host, your longtime host, your friend here on the internet to talk about nerdy shit. And today is going to be the first episode of what I'm calling season 2 of the new and returned Comics and Stuff podcast. This is actually going to be a special segment I am calling the Paper or Plastic podcast, presented by Comics and Stuff, which stars not only myself but my dear friend and editor of the show for the last season, or I guess the last year and a half, Campos, my good friend, Sergeant Campos. If you can come on in. Hello, sir. Welcome. How are you today?
Hello. Hey, thank you for inviting me. Thanks.
Well, you're a part of this.
Good point. Good point. It just hit me as I said it. Okay.
Yes. You no longer need an invite. You're a part of the podcast. Today, we're going to be talking to
the green screen.
The green screen. I love it. Today we're going to be talking to a dear friend of mine as well, named Nate. He is a lawyer. We are going to be covering some pretty hot, heavy stuff, and not in a good way. We're going to be talking about the fiasco that is coming out of Wizards of the Coast with MTG 30th edition, as well as the new 1.1a 2.0 OGL that has caused so much strife and anger and rage throughout the community. We're going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff. We're also going to get Campos to introduce himself and talk a little bit about himself, and same with Nate when he comes on in. Campos, what do you say about bringing Nate in?
All right, yeah, definitely. Awesome.
Let's do it. All right, and here he is. Nate, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Nate, thank you for taking the time to come on the show and chat with us, especially for our season opener. We're going to be covering a lot of stuff today that is going to be very, I guess, legal heavy, and neither of us are lawyers, but you are. So, not only are you a lawyer, but you've also been one of my best friends for the last 12 years. You are a very talented writer. You are a DM. You are a passionate Magic player. Whom I like to think of as a bit of a rival. Quite often we seem to go head to head. And today you are here in your capacity, I guess, as a legal person to kind of help us navigate and understand certain things. So first and foremost, I would like for you, Nate, before Campos introduces and tells us about himself. Nate, could you tell us, just give us your little legal disclaimer of who you are, what is it that you do,
Sure.
et cetera, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my name is Nate Compton. I am a lawyer in Washington State. I'm licensed to practice law in Washington State. I'm not an intellectual property lawyer, which is going to be a lot of what we talk about. I do have experience with writing and reviewing contracts, as well as litigation, which is something we're also going to be talking about pretty heavily. Main disclaimer with that part of my life is that I am a lawyer, but I am not your lawyer viewer. So I am not rendering legal advice, and your mileage may vary with the topics discussed. None of this should be construed as you should go out and do these things. And I'm trying to frame everything I'm saying as an explanation or general education rather than specific legal advice. And then in terms of who I am beyond just being a lawyer, I'm Devin's DM or GM for our tabletop role-playing game campaign that homebrew that we've been running since I've been running for the group since 2017. I think it was 5.
A little longer than that, I think.
Yeah, I think it was early 2017 was when we started it.
Something like that. Yeah.
And because this was when I moved, it was when we started it that fall or that summer. So yeah, 2017. So it'll be 6 years this year. Continuous campaign.
Gone through 2 player characters.
And you're level 17 now, which is pretty impressive. I think this next leg is going to carry us through level 20, which is really interesting.
Oh,
it's kind of where D&D kind of starts to break down a little bit. Other than being
a god bird.
Yeah, other than being a dungeon master, I am an avid Magic the Gathering collector and player. I collect Pokemon cards as well. That's my main collecting is collectible cards. I have some figures, some stuff. I collect other bits and bobs. I'm Dragon's Horde. My username is mainly a reference to the fact that I collect like a dragon. It's sort of I find the things that I like and I sort of group them in an odd, nonsensical, grouping of things and stuff. and it doesn't need to go together necessarily. I just sort of I find what I like and I put it in there. So that's my edge of where I'm at. I'm also an avid video game player, and a writer. I write science fiction fantasy.
He is a very talented writer, and I'm the odd man out of the group when it comes to video gaming. Like they all do all the games. I will play Pokemon, Zelda, Kirby, and at that I haven't even picked up my Pokemon Scarlet. I played it for a couple days when it came out, put it down, and Campos is not very happy with me about this because I promised him we would play it together.
Yeah, we've been bugging you.
Yeah, I know. It's my bad. Now, Campos, let's jump over to you. So most viewers will know you as the guy who edits the videos. Your face pops up every now and then, like "Hello, Campos," blah blah blah. But we haven't had you on the actual show in your capacity as a host. So I would love it if you could tell just everybody kind of about yourself, who you are. What is your background in like real life and like in nerddom? What do you collect? Where do you kind of fall into the fray and everything?
Right. So yeah, I go by Campos. My government name is Miguel. I'm a New York native.
I halfway expected you to be like, my name is Inigo Montoya.
You killed me. You're ready to die. But yeah, I'm a New York native. Seattle transplant. My parents are from
Beautiful.
El Salvador. 16 years in the military. Be 17 this April. Have 2 teens. Been married for 14 years. Well, will be married for 14 years this year. We've been family for how long have you been married into the family?
5 years, 5.5. So, yeah, 5 years.
Okay, we'll edit it out if we're off.
That's another fun connection. I officiated his wedding.
Okay, yeah,
That's true.
All right,
yeah. That's the thing you did.
Yeah, I think I did do. And
I remember that. I was there. All right. So now, what about your nerdy stuff? Where do you fall in the spectrum of nerddom?
Definitely cinematography, technology. Pretty much like computer sciences and whatnot. Like
I would not be where I am without Campos in terms of computer stuff. My shit's a mess.
Oh yeah, that day of cable managing, that was like my zen moment. Just like Devin had like
it's
this
beautiful
red nest of cables, and like that day it was just like I was able to do a little bit of cable management. It was great. It was like it's good for the soul.
It's beautiful. I stare at it all.
Yeah, cable situation. That is a thing of beauty. Quite frankly, my desk is a nightmare.
You should have Campos come fix it. He's a masterpiece worker. Like
I've done a bit with it, but I have a sit stand desk, so it's kind of hard because I got to make sure they're bundled together in a way that they're not going to yank anything out when I raise the desk up. So it's very
I had that same problem with the sit stand Velcro. I
got some neoprene sleeves. There's zippers.
Ooh, those
sleeves.
are nice.
So yeah, they work really well.
All right, yeah. We'll probably look at your setup one day. Let's see if we can. But yeah, that's my area. I mean, also video game is just not as much lately. That just with my schedule, but definitely that's my area of nerddom, if you will.
Fair enough.
But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Well, we like you in a nutshell. We also like you out of the nutshell. We just like you as Campos. So now let's. I suppose that now that we've taken the first almost 10 minutes to just kind of rant and ramble about ourselves. The internet knows me. Y'all don't need to know nothing more about me. You're all probably already sick of my ass. So whatever. But let's kind of jump into what it is that we're going to be covering tonight. So Nate, in your capacity as a lawyer, you're going to be telling us about 2 things which are namely going to be the legal ramifications or the potential legal problems that might possibly will whatever pop up regarding the recent decisions of Wizards of the Coast to do things such as reprinting the reserved list or their updates to the OGL. And what is the OGL? What is the reserve list? And the things that could have come with it. And it's a lot. It's a heavy, folks, listen to this while you're driving, listen to this while you're working, and trying not to die of boredom, because this is going to be quite a bit. As for my part in this, I'm pretty good with collectibles finance in terms of kind of gauging what's going on in a market. How that's what I know how to talk about. Not that I'm an expert, nor do I have a degree in it. I've just been in that industry for several years now, so I can kind of talk about it. But again, not an expert. Whereas Nate is actually literally a employed lawyer who is good at what he does. But yeah, I think were we talking about covering the MTG 30th anniversary first? Is that where we were headed? Okay. Yeah. Well, for the internet, for the uninitiated, for those of us who are curious about it but don't play Magic, don't collect Magic, XYZ. Really quickly, I'm just going to give you a very brief summary, 2-sentence description. The Magic the 30th Anniversary Edition was a set of 4 packs of cards, each with 15 cards inside those packs, and each of those packs was randomized with the chance of getting 1 to 2 rare cards in each pack. However, the set was 296 cards, I believe, and all you could have bought, I think, like 75 to 80% of those for less than the cost of these boxes. They, as in Wizards of the Coast, were charging $999 plus shipping, handling, and tax, which averaged out to around $1,100. In this pack, they decided that they were going to reprint several cards from the reserved list, which is a list of cards that Magic the Gathering had promised to never reprint, and Nate will be able to elaborate a little more on that. And they printed those anyways, and it caused a lot of controversy. A, because of the price point. B, because the cards in those in the reserve list was reprinted. And C, I mean, you weren't even guaranteed to pull those cards that have a perceived high value. You could have spent $1,000 and opened those packs and gotten cards worth 65 cents, which added to that. That controversy. So I suppose the first question I would have for Nate in terms of the whole MTG Magic the Gathering fiasco. Can you first just explain to us, just for everybody, what is the reserved list?
Right. So to understand the reserved list, we're gonna have to go back in Magic history to the beginning. So we're gonna flash back in time, get in the time machine, go back to 1993.
The year I was born.
Yeah, I was 2. So in 1993, the Magic the Gathering was released, and it was released in the what's now called the limited edition. So limited edition is the alpha and beta sets. It was so popular that they sold out of the alpha run fairly quickly, and they printed beta. And then later on in 93, 94, they printed unlimited, which is the white border version of the limited runs. And like it sounds, limited edition, they had a very limited print run in 2 batches. Unlimited had an unlimited print run. They printed a lot more product in unlimited. These initial cards were, there was a lot of them that were fairly powerful. A lot of people contend that the 9 most powerful cards in Magic were printed in 1993. They're called the Power 9, which includes Black Lotus, and it also includes all the Moxen, which are the Mox gems that are all banned in every format because of how format breaking they are. This also printed the first ever dual lands, which are the Taiga and all those dual lands, which are
Badlands, Bayou, Savannah, Plateau, all those guys.
They tap for 1 mana of any of 2 colors, and they enter untapped. It's the only time they've ever done that where a dual land will have no downside. And those are very powerful, right? And so as we continue forward along Magic's trajectory into 94 and 95, Magic's initial vision, the initial vision for Magic was a game that had a core set of playable cards that had new cards rotating in and problem cards being filtered out. So after Limited and Unlimited came out, there were expansions. The first one was Arabian Nights, and then Antiquities. And then after those sets were released, they released a new core set called Revised or 3rd Edition. And Revised reprinted a lot of cards from Limited Edition and Unlimited, as well as select cards from Arabian Nights and Antiquities, excluding some of the ones that they thought were form breaking or rules breaking. And then they did this again with a set called 4th Edition, and with a set called an accompanying set to 4th edition, which I believe was called. I have this in my notes here. Bear with me. So in 1994 it was 4th edition and Chronicles, which are considered this part of the same set, but Chronicles was envisioned as the best of 94. So Chronicles and 4th edition were released in 1995, and Chronicles pulled together best things from like Ice Age and other things that were good sets and it was an entirely reprint set. And what reprints mean in the Magic context, at least in the early 90s, was cards were originally printed in a black border treatment, and then the unlimited sets or the reprint sets printed in a white border treatment. But collectors and fans who had bought a lot of these, that were cards that were already getting to be rather expensive at the time. I mean, Black Lotus shot up in price really quickly after its release. So did the dual lands, especially when they stopped printing things like the dual lands in subsequent sets. And other cards that were considered fairly valuable, where they would rise in value after the initial limited release. And then as soon as Wizards reprinted those cards, the market would be flooded with unlimited versions of the print. So cards that were much more available, and the collector value of those cards would go down. So Wizards so there was a huge fan backlash in 1995 after Chronicles was released. And so in 1996, it's issue number 10 of the Duelist magazine, which is kind of the precursor to the Wizards website. It was
we were talking about this the other day. Yeah,
1994, and they printed it, and it was published by Wizards of the Coast, and it was kind of like the go-to place to learn about Magic stuff, and it had like ban lists and things like that were published in it. Now all that's done on the website, and this ran from 94 to 1999. In issue number 10, dated March 4th, 1996. Oh, the card policy dated March 4th, 1996. The issue came out in May. But the card policy dated March 4th, 1996, responded to the fan backlash over Chronicles in 4th edition and 3rd edition as well, and created a new classification of cards. So before this, you had regular cards, unlimited cards, which say you can use this card in standard format. These cards are not banned. These cards are not restricted. They had two other tags, which is banned and restricted. Banned cards, you can't play them. They're prohibited from the format. Restricted cards, you can play them, but only in certain ways or in a restricted manner. They added in
fun value on those. I was going to ask, like once they become banned, is there any type of like a dip in value? Or
I don't know about in the 90s, but currently it depends because there's a lot of different formats. So it's very rare for somebody to get a blanket ban. For example, Meat Hook Massacre recently got banned in Standard, but it's still a fairly valuable card because it's a staple in Commander. So you have those things where it's going to retain value because it's going to be played, and Commander is the most played format. So cards that see bans in Commander do, I think, sometimes have a dip in value, but a lot of the price setting, especially when a card first comes out, is whether or not it's a standard playable card that is strong in Standard, which kind of just gets into the weeds with Magic's kind of playability. So in 1986, they published a new kind of card, which is a reserved card. And essentially what Wizards of the Coast has done is they said, okay, we're going to designate these cards, and we're going to say these cards are reserved. We will never reprint them in a game functionally identical form. So they're never going to publish them again in a way that can be used in game in the same way that it was used on its card. And what they mean by game functionally, they define that term as a game functionally identical card is one that has the same card power and the same casting cost, right? So they're not going to reprint, a dual land that taps for, white and blue and just call it, something else, except unless it has additional text on it.
Right, because they've printed several multicolored lands now, but it's it enters tapped or Hallowed Fountain,
so
or
it's not the same thing as a Taiga or a Misty Rainforest, or a Tropical Island.
Tropical Island. Tropical Island.
Misty Rainforest is a fetch land. It's not like tropical. Like Misty Rainforest is a good example, right? Misty Rainforest it fetches something, right? If they have a bunch of other fetches that they produce, Misty Rainforest is not on the reserve list, so they could reprint it as much as they want to. And then you can pair like so Strixhaven Campus, or the Quandrix Campus, which is a blue-green dual land that enters tapped, right? It does the same thing as a tropical island, but it doesn't have, it has more text on it, and therefore it's not functionally identical. So it's not violating the reprint policy.
So does it have to be, so it has to have some type of like either an addition to it, like it can't be like okay, I get it.
And interesting, but really interesting, the last paragraph in the card reprint policy, before they give you the list of cards that are put onto the reserved list initially, is the special purpose reprints clause, which says that all of the policies described herein apply only to standard tournament legal Magic cards of standard size and bearing the standard Magic card back. Wizard of the Coast has printed and may continue to print non-standard versions of cards for the sake of promotional use, for sale or promotional use, such as factory sets and oversized cards. So they carved out an exception when they wrote the reserved list, and that was for cards that had an alternate card back or were oversized cards, the cards that you can't use in play. Right.
Yeah, there was at one point like an oversized Black Lotus that you could like get at a tournament, and you can still find those online for like $150 or something.
Right. They also carved out an exception for what they call premium cards, but that was later rolled back. So the reserve list as it stands today is 572 cards, I believe. And in 2000, they added the final cards to the reserve list in 2002. They stopped adding cards to it. And they said from Mercadian Masks forward, there will be no more cards put on the reserve list. Every card is going to be reprintable at our discretion moving forward. So they decided that they're not going to put any more cards on the reserve list. The reserve list is the biggest it's going to get in 2002. And then in 2010, a bunch of fans get upset because they printed some dual decks in 2010 that contained cards from the reserved list. And Wizards realized, Wizards had excused this because they were premium cards. They were a premium product that was not considered to be a standard play card, but they realized that there was a lot of fan backlash about it. So they repealed the part of the card reprint policy, which is the policy that governs the reserved list. They repealed that part that said that they could reprint premium editions. But they keep the thing that says they're allowed to print special purpose reprints, things that are different card back, different size. So that's where we're at today. Is that it's a 572 card list that they promise they will never reprint in a form that will be usable like the original cards were. That's where we get to the current announcement and release of MTG 30th edition, 30th anniversary edition.
Right. Well, so now here's I know that this had so much controversy about it now, and that was, some of that was stuff that I was somewhat familiar with, and some of it I didn't know at all. So thank you for doing your research. The last thing you want to do when you go on the internet is talk about something when you haven't learned about it yourself. Looking at you, most of the internet. So here's one question that I really am curious about. So kind of in line with what you said. So WOTC, they first made that release in Duelist Magazine number 10 in like 1996. They said we're not going to reprint these cards in a legal fashion. And then in 2010, they switch over to that promise of they're not going to reprint these in a premium or non-premium format, but they're or in any way like that. But it's still just cards that were like not tournament legal or whatever have you, which still leaves them that room to reprint these, for example, as in with the MTG30 thing as proxies. Or collective expensive proxies, collectable memorabilia cards that aren't tournament legal. But then we get to things like Mark Rosewater's blog, and here's Blogatog, yes. Mark Rosewater, for again those who are the uninitiated, Mark Rosewater is the lead designer for Magic the Gathering. He's been a figurehead at Magic the Gathering and one of the most famous people in Magic the Gathering, since damn near its inception, outside of Richard Garfield. But he has a blog where folks can ask him questions, And the questions such as reprinting the reserve list with different backs or reprinting the reserve list cards with gold borders, is that a possibility? And he on his blog has said, no, there's no interest in that. Wizards of the Coast will not be doing that. That's not a thing that's going to happen. And it seems that a couple things come to mind here, but first and foremost, what are the possible legal repercussions of Wizards just saying, "Fuck it, we're gonna do it anyways" and reprint all these things? What because I know that there's there's so much anger, so many angry people.
Yeah.
So
well, the answer to this question is not going to be something that most people will enjoy. The short answer is nothing will happen. The long answer is people might try to make stuff happen, but they probably won't be able to make stuff happen. So what people are talking about is they're saying that Wizards has promised us. They promised us it will never reprint these cards. Now, some people were like, well, isn't MTG30 a violation of the card reprint policy? No, it's not, because they are allowed to print non-playable cards as a reprint of those. They're allowed to do that. They're not restricted from printing oversized cards or cards with non-legal card backs. Mark Rosewater said he thought that violated the spirit of the reserve list. And that's his opinion. It's great. He wasn't speaking, as far as I'm aware, in an official capacity as the head designer of Magic, and he's not an executive at Wizards of the Coast. That
was my second question.
So I don't think any. I mean, I could be wrong, and if the lawyer wants to correct me, I'm always open to constructive criticism and alternate corrections. But my opinion is, I don't think that Mark Rosewater has the ability to, in a blog, make statements which are binding on his employer. Right? He's a senior figure with Magic Gathering at Wizards of the Coast, but he's not in an executive capacity. He's not in a super he's not in the capacity that's making all of the financial decisions about the company. And clearly he if his feelings about reprints that had alternate borders or alternate backs was that violated the spirit of the reserved list, they still printed it anyway, even though that was his feeling. So
right.
And I know there's been a lot of hate over that for him. I don't think he deserves it. I think Mark Rosewater's he's been a pretty good stand-up guy for the players of the game, at least in my opinion. I think that his sentiments about the reserve list are in line with a lot of players' sentiments about the reserve list. But ultimately, he doesn't make all of the decisions for Magic. He's not the president of Magic, right? He's the head designer. He has a lot of sway with how the game is developed, as far as I'm aware. But I don't know that what he says is legally obligated. It legally obligates Wizards to do what he says.
Well, see,
the other part of your question, what would happen if, right? What would happen if they just threw the reserve list out the window, right? Everyone was freaked out for a minute there because Wizards accidentally deleted the reserve list off of their website.
I remember that. I remember that.
And it was right after the MTG30 announcement too, so everybody was losing their minds. And a lot of people have actually advocated for this. A lot of people have advocated for the reserve list to go away. I think the prof, Tulare Community College, has advocated for the reserve list to be terminated, and that makes a lot of sense. But the long answer for what would happen if the reserve list just goes away is not going to be favorable to a lot of people, especially people who have a lot of angst about the reserve list. It's that there's not a whole lot of ways in the law to force someone to live up to a promise they made if it's not a contract, right? A contract is a promise that's been written down, or not even written down, but a promise is a contract is a promise that has three key parts: offer, acceptance, and consideration. And what consideration is the exchange, right? You're getting something for something. You're not getting something for nothing. Anything other than it doesn't have consideration, right? If it doesn't have consideration, it's not considered a contract. It's considered just a promise. And promises at law are not generally enforceable. Like if I say, "Hey, I promise to give you my first edition holographic Charizard from 1999," right? I don't have to do that because I'm not getting anything in return. That's just a promise that I've made. However, there is another doctrine that does apply sometimes, which is called promissory estoppel. So promissory estoppel is a fancy legal word that basically means I'm not going to try to translate it because I think it's French. originally. But what it boils down to, what the premise boils down to, is that if somebody makes a promise and you believe them and take them at their word, and you act on the promise, and then you're hurt when that person doesn't hold up the promise, you can claim damages against them and sue to recover damages under contract law. Promissory estoppel has a lot of elements, though. One of them is that it's called reliance. Someone's taking at your word and relying on your promise is foreseeable. The person who makes the promise has to be able to foresee that someone is going to rely on that promise. And then there's also an element that there has to actually be reliance. Someone has to actually perform the reliance they say they did. And then there has to actually be an injury that if promissory estoppel is not applied, the injury would be an injustice, or there's a level of injustice. And I think injustice is the level that we probably won't reach if they get rid of this policy. And I also think that there may not even actually be damage, right? Like let's say tomorrow Wizards of the Coast decided that they're going to reprint all of the dual lands in a tournament legal form. They're going to roll all the dual lands out of the reserved list, and they're going to reprint all of them, and they're going to make them a super premium secret lair drop, right? Because I think if they're going to reprint reserved list cards, they're probably going to do it in a direct sale secret lair so that they can get their hands in that secondary market a little bit, because I think that's what they want, and they'll probably make it super expensive. Does that actually drive down the cost of your dual land from 1990, 1993? If you have an original dual land from 1993, is a new version of a dual land going to drive down the cost of your original dual land? I don't know that's true, because I don't know that the newly reprinted version is going to usurp the historic version that has value because it's been around since 1993. If it does drive that down, that could be considered damage. But is it injustice to not enforce the promise? I don't know that we can get to that bar. Okay. I don't know that we can get there.
Yeah, that I would like to touch on the finance in a few minutes here, because there's a couple things I'd like to talk about. And I know that Campos has a question, but I've got one more before I let him go, and then I've got another one probably after that. Yeah. But so essentially, when Mark Rosewater on his blog said these things like, we're not going to do that, we have no interest in that. I mean, essentially, did he just shoot himself in the foot? Because I mean, yeah, even if he's a well-meaning guy and he's answering these folks' questions and just trying to talk to his community, I mean, if he's answering these questions that potentially have, I mean, are there potential legal ramifications for him saying that as a representative of the company on his blog? He's a public figure who is known, and now that he said these things, that's why so many people are really upset and angry. Is there any sort of legal precedent, or does he just unfortunately look like a dick in that situation?
I think ultimately, because not everything is legally actionable, right? Like, you could be a total asshole and nobody can sue you for that. Like, you can't be sued because you're a dick, and you can't be sued because you're wrong, right? There has to be a level of either malice or intent or something there to be actionable. And I haven't. This is kind of interesting to a complicated, like, joint and several liability with an employer liability, those kinds of things. I really don't think that anything legal is going to come out of that. I just don't see where the claim would come from and what the damages are, right? Because if somebody steals a pencil, right, from somebody that's worth 8 cents, right? Theft is wrong, and that's actionable. Like, you can pursue them for damages for that pencil, but your damages are 8 cents. Right. So where's the value in doing that? Right.
That's fair.
That's one of the things that you have to look at when you're looking at legal action is what are the level of damages, and if the level of damages are what we would call like de minimis or small, the courts are likely not going to pursue something like that, because it's not. People can have a lot of emotions over small things, and they're not necessarily going to be legally actionable.
Right. Your emotions don't necessarily constitute a lawsuit. Okay.
And I don't think that what things that Morrow said on his blog are necessarily enforceable against Wizards. And I could be wrong about that. I don't think I am, but I could be wrong about that. And it was certainly right. Like I think he was coming from a place, but I shouldn't put words in his mouth. But looking at it from just the clinical perspective of this guy who has a relatively senior position with this company made these claims, and then the company did something else. Let's think of another example of a different company, right? Let's say somebody at Microsoft, right? A head designer of a department at Microsoft made some claims about they're never going to remove some function from Microsoft Word, right? We're never going to remove the copy paste function from Microsoft Word. And then somebody at Microsoft says, oh, well, you can't copy and paste out of Microsoft Word anymore because in our infinite wisdom, we're making this business choice. Who knows why, right? Is the head designer now liable for the company breaking his promise? No, because he never had the authority to promise something for the company. He never had the authority to make a legally binding promise that the company has to follow. This is a capacity to contract, right? Like corporations are considered people by the United States government, right? The corporations are considered to be a legal entity capable of contract, which is how law often defines a person. And corporations aren't people, obviously, because they're corporations. They're often made up of several or hundreds of people, thousands of people even. And corporations, they don't have, like, I'm a person and I have the ability to contract. I can go sign my name on a document and bind myself to do that thing that I agreed to do by signing the contract, right? But a company can't do that of its own free will. Somebody has to decide to do that. And the person or persons often who have the capacity to contract for the company's power of attorney, those kinds of things, they're generally at the top of the pyramid, right? They're at the top of the structure because it makes sense, right? Like the people who are in control of the company are the ones who can guide where it goes and can bind it legally to do things. There are contexts, of course, where other people in the company can make statements that are binding to the company. It's not impossible to have a person make statements that can be binding to a company, but I don't think that in this context that any of those would apply. And again, I could not legal advice, but it's possible.
That's all right. Okay. I've got a couple or one more, but Campos, you sir, go. I know you had one.
Right. I just sorry. So my question is like, what role do you believe that Hasbro plays in this? You know, like since their acquisition, like you know, like do you think that like a lot of these decisions post was it like 1999? Like,
oh yeah, like
this
Hasbro, like, yeah.
When did Hasbro buy Wizards of the Coast? Oh my God!
I just Googled it right now. September 1999. They announced it in 97.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Hasbro has owned Wizards through a lot of their biggest moments, right? Like Hasbro owned Wizards, bought Wizards right after they had secured the Pokemon deal, right? Hasbro's been involved for a long time. It's not like they're a new owner, right? But there are a lot of new players at these companies. I'm not an expert in business or the way these things work politically, but I do know that the person who's in charge of the company gets a lot of flack and gets a lot of responsibility for what a company does. And a lot of the people who have escalated up from Wizards to Hasbro and vice versa have taken the company in a different direction from where it was. And you can kind of see that from the way the company has operated. There have been a number of times since 1999 to present where there have been massive controversies with what Wizards has done, both in Magic and in D&D, which we're going to talk about today later. There have been big exoduses from the company because of those decisions, both from fans and from actual employees leaving to go do other things. I don't know if that Hasbro purchase decision was one of those things. I know that big evil corporate overlords can often rub, especially artistic and creative people, the wrong way, which for justifiable reasons. I mean, they're big, massive corporations. They're not.
They're more worried about
at some point when you get to a certain size as a capitalist corporate entity, there's some stuff going on. I mean, at some size, at some level, you're choosing profit over people. You're choosing to make more money, right, rather than take care of people or whatever. And it's one of those things that you can emphasize of corporations are not actually people because people don't Well, people do make those decisions, but you know what I'm saying, right? Corporations have different goals. Different corporations' goals are always the capitalist goal to gather more money, which is, I think, where Hasbro rubs a lot of people the wrong way. I mean, they literally own monopoly. You know, like
right.
I think the executives of Hasbro and the capitalist idea can be the blame of a lot of these controversies can probably be laid at the feet of capitalism for sure. I mean, 4 packs for $1,000. What is that if not a money grab, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, it sometimes strikes me, and this is more of just like a personal opinion / talking point. I mean, historically speaking, you know, like if you treat your employees well, your employees treat your customers well, and your customers will be happy and they come back and spend more money. If you make your customers happy, they'll spend more money with you. And it seems very sometimes it just, when it comes to corporate America in general, just the way that people will, or corporations will, treat people like shit, and they and they lose business. They're like, why is nobody buying anything for, or why are our customers angry or hating us? I mean, it's more of just an interesting thing to me to see, like, dude, like Hasbro has D&D and Magic. I mean, if you guys just listened to like the majority of your fan base, just like the average Joes, not the celebrity influencers or anything like that, just the regular dudes or gals who play your games, I feel like you would, I mean, I guess, yeah, maybe you might not be doing some cash grabs, so you might not be doubling or tripling your $1 billion revenue, you know, in 5 years or whatever have you, but like you would have something, like you had it good. That's just me rambling and talking as and that's just me as a non-business person who's just a customer, right? I get the idea of business is to make money.
The thing that I've seen being thrown around a lot in this context is it seems like a lot of business people are saying, and I think there's an executive at Wizards who has said this. I don't have a direct quote, but that Dungeons and Dragons specifically is under what they're saying is under monetized.
Yeah. So that was Cynthia Williams. She is
that was verbatim, actually.
Yeah. Under monetized. It is a direct quote. I just didn't have the person.
Cynthia Williams, current president of WOTC. That was on the fireside chat that her and Dr. Cox. Sorry, I watched too much Rudy on Alpha Investments, but like that's what they said during the fireside chat.
Right.
You know, and it also kind of baffles me that Cynthia Williams read the Wikipedia description of Magic the Gathering. I don't understand how you can be the president of a company that runs 2 of the most successful games ever created in all of history and not even know what one of them is, to the point where you have to read what it is off of a Wikipedia page. Like, I get, like, it's the whole corporate thing, but like, girl, what are you doing?
Well, I mean, I understand that perspective, right? But I do work with, you know, part of my job is I work with companies and corporations, so I do have a line into that a little bit as well. And, you know, I don't necessarily think that the CEO of Boeing knows how all of the landing gear works.
Right.
How planes stay.
But he has an idea. He knows that they sell planes, or you know, they make planes and they fly and take off and land.
I didn't watch the fireside chat or Alpha Investments coverage of the fireside chat, so I'm not in the loop on that particular issue. And it sounds like she may have been a little bit tone deaf. And I'm not here to defend any executive or the company. That's not what I'm here for, right? But I also think that we're talking about 2 different kinds of people, right? A lot of people who work at Wizards are game designers, developers, people who are in the thick of building these games that we love. And those people in general, I think they're getting a lot of blowback right now, and they're not the people who I think deserve it. I think people who deserve the blowback are the people who are up at the top, who are making those decisions about, you know, especially with Magic the Gathering, right? It's not hard to make money on Magic the Gathering, at least from what I've seen of the hobby that I've been involved in for years, decades at this point, right? There are so many premium versions of cards. There are so many people who are willing to shell out a lot of money for Magic products. I think that having the money mindset with these hobbies is not always, by definition, a bad thing for a company that we want to keep existing and producing the game. However, that needs to be measured by. There needs to be a seatbelt. There needs to be something that measures them and holds them back from full capitalism. Right? Like, yes, keep making the products we want, keep reinvesting capital, keep making Magic, keep making D&D, do those things, yes. But also, maybe do it in a way that gives us what we actually want rather than just taking money.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which I think is part of why MTG30 flopped so bad.
Well, and you know what? I do have one more question regarding MTG30. Before Campos, did you have any other questions or talking points before I ask?
No, that was...
No? Okay. So here's my. You talked a little bit about like possible like monetary damages and things like that with certain cards. So I'm not sure who all knows this, but for Wizard, the WPN, the Wizard Premium Network or Play Network stores, they Wizards of the Coast released a thing saying, you know what, we are going to give out one box for every like regular Wizard Play Network store, and then for the premium stores, they're each getting 3 boxes of MTG30 for free for no cost. When Wizards of the Coast launched the sale, which famously and infamously and notoriously ended after about 39 minutes. It is estimated by several people, and I cannot confirm this number, but this is what the general consensus seems to be. It seems to be that a general estimate of about 2,000 of these boxes, maybe 2,500 of these boxes sold for $1,000 on that sale. So that's a very low number compared to what they had. The rumored estimated supply is 15,000 to like 18,000 boxes, something in that range, and they were hoping that it was just going to sell out. But we all know the infamous tweet of "the sale has concluded." Thank you to all those who joined us today. An estimated 2,500 boxes or so sold for $1,000. Now, for Wizards Play Network stores, there are enough that I believe about 9,000 of these boxes are going to be going out into the market for free. This is a product that flopped, very obviously. Nobody wanted it. A lot of people are treating it like a toxic asset. There have been very few sales of these boxes already. There was a couple shill bids there was a couple, where people were like shilling them. So we're not talking about those, but we're talking about the actual sales of these are not innumerable. There's just like 1 or 2, and they're selling for around the initial price that it was sold for. My worry and wonder and curiosity here is when 9,000 of these boxes get out into the open market with a zero cost basis, and these other 2,500 people or whoever maybe bought 2 or 3 of these boxes for $1,000 a pop, all of a sudden start to lose and like hemorrhage money because it's a toxic asset. People are buying these for dirt cheap or not wanting them, can't sell them, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that does amount to a serious financial loss. I mean, is there some sort of legal ramification for these significant financial losses in the product that these people invested their money into? Or is it that, hey, you bought a product and now we're giving it away for free, like you bought it when it first came out, whatever, there's no... I'm not sure.
I think there's a few tactics you could take with this. I don't want to take too much time on my answer. I think there's a couple of different angles you could go at for this. I think the most they could probably get is a refund, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, again, we're talking about the level of damages, right? Expectation damages are generally not something you can get. So expectation is like, oh, I was expecting this asset to appreciate in value when I purchased it. I should get paid out for the appreciation that didn't happen because when Wizards dumped the asset. But I think you also have a strong argument for the fact that this flopped really, really bad. So when the people bought it, it didn't have the value they thought it did, right? When the people bought these products, it flopped so hard, and the sale was only 39 minutes long or whatever. The sale was short. That was just giving away something that, I mean, really doesn't necessarily have the value that they wanted it to have. Right? They're giving it away because it's not worth, right? Like they're giving it away for free. And I know that's going to be irksome to the people who bought it, the small subset of the Magic playing population that bought it. I mean, yeah, like what if we assume that, people bought like each individual person bought 1.5 of these things and 2,500 or whatever of these things sold, right? That's only about 1,000 plus people who bought into this thing, who may have bought it for reasons other than finance, right? They may have purchased it because they wanted to collect it, because they're avid collectors and they're not necessarily thinking from the financial aspect. So they may not actually have damage, right? Other than the economic damage of the product not retaining the value. But again, that kind of tied to expectation damage, which I don't think is necessarily recoverable in every context. So I don't think a whole lot will be actionable. I mean, I could be wrong about that. There could be a whole thing where, oh, it's a defective product, or it's a product not as advertised, or you turn around and gave it away for free, or what have you. But I also don't know that necessarily that's going to have that giving these to game stores, to giving product to businesses, is going to have the impact of flooding the market, because I don't think the businesses are then going to turn around and give these away for free.
Right.
Like, I think some businesses have said they're just not going to sell them; they're going to donate them or not, or something along those lines. Which
yeah,
I don't
there's
know
a. I'm not gonna name names, but they're the couple like local card shops, like some that I go to. They've said that they don't plan on selling these for profit. They are going to like have draft tournaments for them, and people can win them, and then have the opportunity to draft with those packs or boxes.
And the other thing too is that sealed product, right? It's a really speculative market in general, right? Like, you can buy a sealed box and hold a sealed box, and it might not go up in value. It may go down in value. It may fluctuate a lot. It's kind of like a stock, right? I mean, even unsealed product is a speculative market in general. So I think too that you may not have a claim to be damaged by this, because if anything, this is remaining a fairly unsaturated. I could see it being a different scenario, right? If Magic just said, "Oh, well, we realized this was a flop, so we're going to print 10 million more of these units, and we're going to give them away for free, or we're going to sell them for a lower price because it didn't do well." I think that seems more unjust to me from this perspective, than just, "Oh, this didn't perform well, we're going to give away our excess stock so we don't have to hold on to it," right? And I don't know in general, because I mean, I think I'm trying to think about another context, right? Like, it's not like these things can spoil, but they will take up warehouse space. So the company's cutting its costs by giving away these products so that they can maintain their warehouse space for actual selling product, right? And they got to do something with it, right? Like, we can't just expect them to just burn them, right? If they're not going to sell and they're not going to just destroy them. Which obviously the collectors would love that, because if they destroy everything above those that were sold, that's the opposite effect, right? That the market is now
creates scarcity.
It creates artificial scarcity. This way, they still have the number they said they were going to print, the limited run they said they were going to print, and the number of actual units has not gone down. Therefore, I don't know that there's an argument for diminished value. It's possible. Again, I don't have all the facts. I don't have. We probably won't know the answer to this question until everyone's gotten these products in their hands, because I don't think people have them yet, right? They haven't been shipped out yet.
No, people. I believe people have gotten them in hand already.
Well, yeah. Again, I think I know that one of the big things that happened with the MTG30 was a couple of companies put out buy lists for these, and the prices on the buy lists were super low. But it kind of makes sense why, right? Because they're not playable cards. They're essentially expensive reprint. They're essentially proxies.
We'll talk about the buy list when we get into finance, because I mean, there's some interesting stuff there. I think that's all I had on the legal stuff. Compost, did you have anything before we kind of start moving on?
No.
No,
no, I definitely agreed. Like the whole, the way I see it is definitely just like the way you can't really like hold people like companies accountable like for like cryptocurrency, kind of like the same premise,
right?
So yeah,
and it's market fluctuation, right? Like, people can get really mad at companies for making decisions that make the stocks tank, and there's actionable things within the corporate structure you can do. Like, you can oust directors, you can oust executives, things like that if you're a shareholder, right? But it's not like you can sue them for devaluing stocks necessarily. And again, I don't know that angle of the law as well, but it's this kind of stuff happens all the time, and some people just make bad choices, right? And you can't necessarily sue somebody for making a mistake or making a bad call, right? Because that's not. There has to be a level of something there that needs to be redressed. There needs to be some kind of an injustice there.
Right. Now, in terms of like MTG finance stuff, so a lot of people will know that term. Some people might not. For the uninitiated, MTG finance is very literally the collecting of high end, the collecting and investing in of high end Magic the Gathering cards, reserve list cards, things like that. So, the reserve list, and this kind of touches on something that you had talked about earlier. The reserved list does have cards that have retained like astronomically high values, and some are just like a few cents or a few bucks. With 572 cards on there, not every single one is going to be a life-changing amount worth of money. But there are cards like the Power 9, so that's all the Moxins, the Black Lotus, Ancestral Recall, and whatever else off the top of my head that I'm talking too fast. But you understand the point. Couple things that I've learned. So I know that revised stuff did take a hit when MTG30 was released. It did take a pretty big downtick. I believe there was, oh gosh, was it revised or unlimited? Pretty sure it was. You know what? It may have been unlimited. One of the two. Again, not a financial expert, just a guy who pays attention to stuff. But one of the two, I mean, there was at one point, if you go into like mtgstocks.com and you start looking at the market, there was at one point where one of the, I believe it was the unlimited Black Lotus dropped from like, $19,000 down to like 11,000. And that's like a near 50% drop. That's a big drop. And that was all kind of correlated with the release of MTG30. It certainly has found its way back up. However, in regards to talking about if you were to reprint, like you said earlier, if you were to reprint the dual lands today, would that devalue the dual lands from yesteryear? I would go so far as to say I don't think that reprinting the dual lands, kind of like what happened in MTG30, is going to drive down completely the value of the original vintage dual lands. Those are valuable for several reasons. I mean, there's age, there's collectability, there's nostalgia, and there's the fact that it's an industry staple. It is something that people look to and go to for kind of like an anchoring point for Magic the Gathering. They are iconic. So in reprinting them, it's not that they're going to drive the prices down into the ground. There may be a bit of a tantrum in the market, and there might be a little bit of an upset, and some people might just start selling. When this happened, there was a point where a lot of local game stores shut off their buy lists and stopped purchasing cards of the reserve or off the reserve list because people were fire selling their collections. It was not good at all. It looked really bad, and there was a lot of freak out. I think that since then it is now leveled out. I still have my dual lands, and personally, because MTG30 was such a toxic and disliked, asset, like I wouldn't want to invest in the, MTG30 dual lands, but I can see how one who is new to the game and potentially can't afford $800 for a near mint condition of the original Volcanic Island, from revised, might want to pay out $300-400 for the new proxy version of it. I think that it's a good entry point for new collectors, and I think that it's a toxic asset for most who are serious collectors, so they're not going to want to touch it anyways. They hate it too much. So I mean, I'm not necessarily worried about the prices of things like a Black Lotus or the Power 9 or anything like that getting driven down. They will drop a few dollars in value here, but original Magic will always continue to go up. It's one of those things where it's just, even though I'm not a huge fan of Hasbro, and I think that they're these giant evil corporate robot overlords, I don't see Magic the Gathering going anywhere.
And the I think another interesting point too is like compare Magic with Pokemon, right? Pokemon is still a thriving card game, and Pokemon reprints Charizard almost every set. Is the 1999 first edition Charizard less valuable?
And I will say Pokemon, while being one of the big three, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic the Gathering, they're like the big three card games. But in terms of like how their cards were, it is so different, even though they're the same. Campos, you look like you have something like teetering on the tip of your tongue. What's up?
Yeah, so it was about going back to the financial part. I mean, I saw that there was a falling out of like the community, right?
Mhm.
But there were some financial repercussions. Like I vaguely saw something about like Bank of America.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe you could elaborate on that
So
a little bit more.
yeah, so Bank of America, they released they have their finance guys who follow stocks and put out recommendations or whatever of what to buy, what to sell, what is, and usually the stocks that they put out are set to buy are the ones that do well, are doing well, people want, and people do pay attention and listen to that stuff. When something gets downgraded, it's called downgrade for a reason, from buy to sell. That means that company is not doing well. It's not worth it right now. And I mean, there's and that's not the full picture. That is just a very brief explanation from a non-finance expert guy. This is just my understanding of it. But there was a financial guy from Bank of America. He had been going around talking to players, talking to collectors, local game store owners, folks like that, kind of, on the farthest most ground level of the game, people who get the product from the company and play it and love it. Um, and what he had heard was a lot of negativity. I mean, talking about reprinting cards too much, driving down the value of cards, product fatigue, and several other things like that. And when he wrote the article, he determined that it is time that I think it was Wizards of the Coast is killing its golden goose, which is Magic the Gathering, in that they are treating their community of players and collectors and shop owners so poorly that people are either leaving the game en masse, they're selling off their collections, and they are going to downgrade it to sell because it's not doing well from that perspective.
They didn't downgrade it to
Um,
sell. They downgraded it to underperform. So I don't think they
Underperformed. There we
downgraded
go.
to sell stock, but it was that they
But
had
they did recommend that it was like sell as opposed to buy it now, get as much use as you can, or
yeah.
whatever have you.
Mm-hmm.
They had lost.
And this is pre D&D fiasco, right?
Right.
Like this
is pre D&D fiasco.
Yeah.
Their stock has dropped, I think, like $20 over the last, since like what, October, September,
Yeah.
something like that. They were. I remember checking in the middle of 2022 last year, and they were around like $87. And as of like yesterday, which is mid January, they're at like $62.
Right.
I think a lot of that does have to do with I mean, their revenue, the negativity in the market for their stuff. I mean, stockholders, whatever, they're still people. They still have, they still are humans that hear things. I mean, there was even the time where the CEO called the Magic the Gathering community price sensitive, which is why they didn't, I guess, make their bone for whatever financial quarter that was, which is when they jacked up the prices of their stuff. So I mean, there's it's all just, it was a lot of negativity, and that's why their stock has dropped. And I think that it was a direct repercussion of what was going around. I mean, it's the Magic the Gathering and the D&D community are not quiet when shit like this happens.
No.
There are some interesting differences I see between MTG and D&D in terms of community that we'll touch on.
And if you look back to the card reprint policy published in 1996, it was a response to fan backlash in 1995. How vocal do people have to be in 1995 to get the attention of a company? Internet.
Yeah, internet. No
baby,
internet.
Baby internet. Like,
yeah,
this is a magazine. People are writing letters to the editor, right? Like, people are writing into Wizards and being irate about it. So that just shows you how vocal and dedicated this player base is. And there are still people who started playing in 1993 and are still playing Magic and are still vocal about the game and its stuff. And I think a lot of the just to touch on the devaluation by Bank of America as well, they did a deep dive on the trading card game property, right? And I think there's some genuine concerns from collectors, because we saw something like this happen in the 80s with sports cards, right? They saturated the market with sports cards, and the values of sports cards did not hold because the market was oversaturated. Yeah. So that I think there are investors and obviously people who are or organizations who are watching investments who are concerned that the same thing is going to happen to Magic the Gathering after the next couple of years. I mean, how many sets and products do we have last year? Are we going to have?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was at one point it was, one set quarterly or something like that. This last year it was 1 to 2 products a month. So I mean, people are missing products. There's product fatigue. Their wallets can't keep up. Their finances can't keep up. So people are now missing out or unable to partake in stuff.
And the cost per box is going up, right? The prices are increasing. Inflation
for like a third time now.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of it is in January, the prices of everything goes up because inflation is everybody adjusts to inflation at the beginning of the year, right? So inflation prices go up. Looking at buying a mattress, right? The mattress price is going to go up in January because that's when the inflation gets added on for that fiscal year.
Yeah.
So
so for 2023, you can. So what I believe WOTC said regarding Magic for 2023, you can count on having like a main standard product every other month. That doesn't count secret layers. That doesn't count supplementary products. That doesn't count special products like Modern Horizons or Commander Legends. Like, I mean, you could be looking still at 2 to 3 products a month, and they're just saying that it's only going to be 6. But I mean, fact is, I missed stuff, and me, like I'm usually right on top of it when it comes to like Magic or D&D or like Flesh and Blood stuff. Like I will just.
Have you bought any Dominaria Remastered?
Nope.
Yeah,
I
did.
Like,
I bought a box.
Oh, I know you got some cool shit in there.
Yeah,
but anyway,
I didn't pay for the box though, which I think is part of the discussion. I don't think I paid for
store credit. Store credit.
Well, I haven't sold anything back, but I don't think I don't think what I pulled in the box paid for the box.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's a whole different conversation.
I've heard that the price of like Vampiric Tutor, because of the reprint, it's dropped down to like $30 from. I remember one time I sold it to Mox for like $60. So
I think it's probably going to go back up though. I think because we saw that happen with some of the we see that with fetches and shocks when they get reprinted, but they still go back up.
Yeah. Every industry and every major game will experience a crash and like a bear market and a bull market and all this stuff. The comic book industry entirely, not just one company, but almost the entire comic book industry, which is where I regularly hail from, is it almost crashed completely and entirely in the 90s, and now look at where it's at now. It's at the pinnacle of collecting. Like you said, baseball cards in the 80s. There was collectible coins and stuff like that in the 80s as well, or 70s or something like that. So I mean, maybe it's just time for the trading card market to hit that. I mean, there was that bubble of Pokemon, but it was just Pokemon. There wasn't anything else. But then there was MetaZoo, and now WOTC and Magic. So I mean, it's just a cycle. I think that everything will be fine financially. Even like the Black Lotus from the 30th anniversary edition, like the retro frame one, I checked, and it was like it started at $3,400, and now I see people asking $4,500 for it on buy lists. So I think that the product itself, while it's toxic right now, will eventually kind of find its niche and find its way into its little niche of the community, and it will just kind of be forgotten to time, and the game will move on. I'm excited for the Lord of the Rings crossover, returning to Eldraine and Ixalan specifically, because that was my favorite set of all time. I think the game's going to be fine. Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. I think there's really going to be. I mean, if the fans don't vocalize their problems with the game, nothing will happen. So this is I think the way the relationship with the fans and Wizards works, right? They say something that we don't like, and we let them know, and then they either change it or something else happens. But the world keeps marching onwards. Very true. Now we have talked. Oh, Campos, yes.
I was going to say, like, maybe I'm a little bit pessimistic, but these decisions have just been bad decision after bad decision, so I mean,
it seems like you are right in that it feels like they don't have somebody who knows how to steer the boat. Well, and it is a disheartening thing to feel like the people who have control over something that you really love just don't seem to care about what they're doing or how their customer base is feeling. But
for some context,
somebody's going to be like, business is business.
For some context on this too, Mark Rosewater in 2013 for the Magic's 20th anniversary posted an article in the Making Magic section of the official Magic blog that is titled 20 Things That Were Going to Kill Magic. So he went through 20 controversies that people thought was going to kill Magic Gathering, and it didn't, right?
Right.
Like the introduction of 60 card decks and four of a kind limits. The creation of a banned and restricted list, creation of the reserved list, the other problem things. So there are controversies that have happened, and he probably has more than 10 more to add in the intervening 10 years between then and now, right? And I think that it's easy to be pessimistic with this kind of stuff, and it's easy because it was both a really good year for Magic. There was a lot of really cool stuff that came out last year, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, all that stuff. There was also really bad and traumatic stuff that happened. Well, I wouldn't say traumatic, but bad and turbulent things that happened with Magic. And I think that you can't look at anything in a vacuum. You have to look at it in its context.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, I think we've talked about Magic for about an hour. Now we're going to get to the meat of the next subject, which is Dungeons and Dragons, something that I play with both of you weekly. And we're going to be talking about the OGL, the SRD, the OGL 1.0A, the 1.0, OGL 1.1A, 2.0, angry YouTubers everywhere, and Wizards actually apologizing because D&D players talk with their fucking wallets. And if you're a parent and letting your kid watch this, I say fuck a lot, and this is not necessarily kid friendly. I'm just saying.
Watch. But why? This has got to be so boring for a child.
This is like fucking young Sheldon or something over here trying to absorb all the legal knowledge. But anyways,
yeah.
So I'm gonna give that brief overview of what happened, basically, internet. So WOTC, again, the guys who own both Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons, they decided to take something called the OGL, which is the original gaming license.
Open gaming license.
Open. Thank you. Sorry, I don't know why open gaming license. I don't know where the word original came from. And they were like, hey, this is perpetual and it's never going to expire. And then they recently were like, hey, just kidding. We're going to introduce a new one and it's awful and it only benefits us and doesn't benefit anybody else. And we're going to try to lie our asses off about it. And then there was a whole shit show ensued. And we're going to talk about the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But first, because I am, again, not a legal person, not a contracty person, I clearly just called it the original instead of the open gaming license because I am a pleb. I love D&D. I play it weekly, but like I just love it and play it. I don't pay attention to the legal side of it. Mm-hmm. Nate, for myself and Campos, who are again uninitiated on this side of it, what is the fucking casuals? I swear. Please explain to us and the interwebs what is the OGL, what is the SRD, and what is the difference between them?
So again, we're gonna have to go back for some historical context here because there's a lot of it of stuff that's happened. The reserved list, the OGL is 20 years old at this point. It was originally published in the year 2000 with the release of Magic's 3rd edition. So Dungeons and Dragons.
20 years?
Yeah. 22 actually. 20 almost 23. Yep.
We're old Campos. We're old people.
So Dungeons and Dragons was originally developed in 1974 by Gary Gygax and Dave Armisen, I believe. I think a whole lot of right of TSR. And TSR was bought by Wizards of the Coast in 1997. So before Wizards was acquired by Hasbro, Wizards bought TSR and they bought the rights to Dungeons and Dragons. They didn't initially in 1997 publish a new version of Dungeons and Dragons. They between 1997 and 2000, in the year 2000, they developed 3rd edition of D&D, which is a pretty universally beloved edition of D&D. 3rd edition and especially 3.5 are both really well liked by the D&D community. Right. We don't talk about 4, so Dungeons and Dragons is developing 3rd edition in the late 90s. So think back late 90s, and it's just sort of a side note. This is pre-Creative Commons. This is pre a lot of open licensing. So the open gaming license was actually pretty revolutionary in its time because there weren't a whole lot of ways for somebody to say, hey, you can just, anybody on the internet, you can just use this. You don't need my permission. Just credit me, right? The Creative Commons now is a license where someone can say, hey, you can use this music for free. Just credit me in the comments or in the description or where have you. But this is 1997, 1988, 1999. This is pre-big internet boom. Internet's around, but it's not huge, right? This is pre-Y2K. This is when you're still buying computer programs on like floppy disks and disks, and this is when you're not and those kinds of things. So Wizards wanted, and there's a lot of sources on this, Wizards wanted to create an environment where other people, fans of the game, could create additional content. There's a lot of speculation as to why this was. One of the practical reasons they did this was so that people not Wizards could produce adventure paths and things like of that nature to supplement official D&D releases, because printing and publishing a book is expensive. And the most money they make off of these books is not necessarily from the adventure paths, which only one player out of the group needs to buy. Only the dungeon master buys the adventure, right? Everybody else in the group, they rely on the dungeon master to sort of build the story for them, and then they explore the world. And the adventure path is a big guide to that. So if they could get third-party publishers to produce adventure paths for them and other supplements, they could sort of not satisfy the demand of the market without needing to front all of the cash themselves to satisfy the demand. Because again, D&D, they call it under monetized, and part of the reason for that is that the tools to monetize D&D are only starting to exist now with the internet, virtual tabletops, those kinds of things. They didn't necessarily have the tools to monetize D&D in the 90s as much. They can sell books. That's why they put out new editions of the rules, so they can sell you something new. So put out adventure paths and new kinds of characters and things like that, because they want you to buy
supplementary books, Morton Cayman's Tome of Foes,
exactly.
Like Xanathar's Guide to Everything, all that.
What the open gaming license is, it's very much a product of its time, and it's a solution to a problem, but it's also a way for the game to be a community property, right? It's not legally, right? It's not legally community property, but the idea was that this open gaming license is going to allow different minds to grow and improve and expand the game in a way that they know they're not going to get in trouble for using the IP. And this is what a license is in this context is it's permission from somebody who holds a intellectual property right and allows somebody else to use it. A license is a kind of contract, right? It says that I'm going to give you this thing if you do this thing. And in this context, a license is something that you get the permission to use somebody's copyright for a specific period of time, or indefinitely, right? The most common kind of common type of perpetual license is when you buy software. If you buy a video game, you're not actually buying the rights to own the code of the video game, and you're not just buying the cartridge or the disc or the download packet the game comes on. You're buying more than just electrons, but you're buying less than full ownership of the game. You're buying permission to use and enjoy that game. And if you're buying the media, if you're purchasing it, that's a perpetual license. You're buying a perpetual license to use that functionally forever, right? But it's not. So that I'm going to get into the legal details in a minute. But the open gaming license is a really short OGL 1.0 and now 1.0A is a very short document. It's only about 900 words. It's attached to a much longer 300-page document called the SRD. The SRD is the standard resource document. Or this, sorry, not the standard resource document. I think I'm conflating.
No, it's something resource document.
System reference
system. Yes, that.
Yeah.
System reference document.
So I'm actually going to be pulling up
so many acronyms.
So many acronyms. It's alphabet soup day. So the OGL 1.0A, it's a 900 word, like 2 brief page legal license that is very open, and fairly generous with what it allows you to do.
And from what I understand, it was like you can basically use the mechanics of how Dungeons and Dragons work. You just can't use like their unique like race names or city names. Like you can't use Waterdeep and you can't use Tabaxi or something like that, right? Like
so it's the system reference document, not standard system reference document. So it was me getting the acronym there wrong. So the SRD, the system reference document, is the core rules of D&D. Basically, it's Player's Handbook Light. It starts with a discussion of like playable races, and it gives you things like elf, dwarf, dragonborn, those kinds of bear races. It includes some magic spells. It includes some monsters. It includes some things like that. It doesn't include things that are directly tied to the Dungeons and Dragons property. Waterdeep, the Sword Coast, Faerun, specific kinds of monsters. I think specifically the Beholder is one of the more closely guarded ones.
Yeah,
the Beholder is one that's very closely tied to Dungeons and Dragons itself, and that's a copyright that's held by Wizards of the Coast. So the SRD essentially is what you would need to run a game of Dungeons and Dragons. You can run a game of Dungeons and Dragons solely using the SRD.
Has like all of the rules and every stipulation, like the really comprehensive.
But it's not as detailed as some of the other treatments. Like it's not as detailed as the Dungeon Master's Guide of the PHP. But it does allow you to run a game with the bear. Like you roll a dice to determine what happens with these kinds of checks, right? That's kind of what the SRD is for. And the Open Gaming License allows you to reprint the SRD or make derivative works from the SRD without the actual language of what they give you is they say the license itself says that in consideration for agreeing to use this license, the contributors, which is basically Wizards of the Coast or anyone else who produced this content, grant you, which is the person reading this and deciding to make Dungeons & Dragons content, a perpetual, worldwide, royalty-free, non-exclusive license with the exact terms of this license to use the open game content, which is the SRD. And there have been multiple SRDs in the past. SRD3, SRD5, and we're currently at 5.1 is the current SRD, and that's but you're allowed to use all the past SRDs if you want to. You can still make content for 3.5 if you want to under the OGL, but you have to abide by the terms of the OGL, which are not onerous. Mainly, you can't use copyrighted properties by Wizards. You have to, you're allowed to make money off of this. You're allowed to sell your work. You're allowed to profit on it. You're not required to pay any royalties. And the key language a lot of people are reading into this is the perpetual language. You're granted a perpetual license. Perpetual is a legal term of art that means I looked up the legal definition. I have a big, thick Black's Law dictionary on my shelf up here. I pulled it out, opened up the definition of perpetual, which essentially means not defined as to the subject, as to the subject of time, right? It is an undefined license where you have an indefinite endpoint. It's meant to go on forever so long as you can continue to use it. And there's no real way to terminate the license unless you violate the terms, right? If you violate the terms of the license, they can terminate the license at their option. But there's no like this is it doesn't a term of art in the legal world is the four corners of the document, which is essentially the things that are written on the document are control what the document says and what the document does. And anything outside of the four corners of the document is not necessarily binding or controlling. You can't just assume that a document says something and expect it to actually work that way in the law. Okay. Within the four corners of the document, there's no necessarily way to terminate it. So that's kind of the explanation of that the OGL, the Open Game License, allows you to use the SRD, the system reference document, system resource document, to create derivative content that would ordinarily be protected by copyright or trademark.
Okay. So that brings me to my first question then. Mm-hmm. So if this was so before we get into like what is it that WOTC released and what the new OGL said and all that stuff, just with this original one in perpetuity, perpetual, using that word because that's what they themselves included on this document. Only the words on the document itself could revoke itself. Was it actually legal of them to say we're canceling this and it is now void or whatever and we're making a new one? Like, was that legal? Could they do that?
That is something that's been really strongly debated, right? Like there's a lot of legal commentators out there. the Rules Lawyer YouTube channel. Legal Eagle even weighed in on it. Legal Eagle had a video, which is really good. He touches on a point that I'm going to get to later as well. And there's, a great saying in the law is that reasonable minds may differ, and there's a lot of different ways to cook an egg, right? You can go about this in a number of different ways. There's a lot of problems with what Wizards of the Coast is proposing with OGL 1.1. One of them is purporting to revoke this license. They don't actually say in 1.1 that they're revoking 1.08. They're saying it's deauthorized, which is a different technical term, but it sounds like what they're trying to do is revoke the 1.0A to put this new one out, right? And in some ways, like that, sure, that's potentially possible, right? But there's nothing within the four corners of the document that says that Wizards has the right to revoke this license at any time. Some people may say that, well, that should be foundational to the fact that they're granting an open license. Can't they just revoke it whenever they want to? They're not required to give away their content. So, but yes, but this is a contract, right? And the contract on its face does not require you to show that you are performing. It does not require you to show Wizards that, hey, I'm making content, I'm availing myself of this contract. All that you have to do is agree to abide by the terms. You don't have to communicate that agreement. So someone who's right now working on developing content for 5th edition under the OGL, right? They don't have to tell Wizards they're doing it. They don't have to tell Wizards, hey, I'm giving you notice that I am using the OGL to develop content. All they have to do is abide by the terms, which is basically they have to include the language of the OGL in their content when they publish it, and they can't go beyond the SRD if they're going to print D&D material. They're also not allowed to use the trademarks or whatever those things. So they have to follow the rules. But other than that, there's no requirement to communicate that to Wizards or tell Wizards that they're doing it. And so it's really hard to say that Wizards can just unilaterally yank the rug out from under that person who's been working for maybe years on this project to build something for the SRD. It's like, well, now the 1.1's out. We've revoked this license. It's no longer an authorized license. We're not going to give you the protection of this. You have to, follow these terms, right?
Now, was there also not a stipulation in the original OGL that said something like, if you do not like a newer version of this, you can revert to using the old one or whatever?
Correct.
Does that?
Yeah. Let me actually go to that because it's actually a really good point too. So paragraph 9 of the OGL is updating the license. Wizards or its designated agents may publish updated versions of this license. You may use any authorized version of this license to copy, modify, and distribute any open game content originally distributed under any version of this license. So that word authorized there is I think probably where the Wizards lawyers are saying, oh, we're going to render these versions deauthorized so that you can't, under that provision of the contract, get into that. But again, there's no mechanism for determining which license is authorized and not authorized. And it doesn't say that Wizards has the sole authority to authorize or deauthorize a license or something like that. So that it's a question where it's ambiguous, which essentially means that someone has to interpret it, which generally means that there may need to be a lawsuit on it, because people who interpret contracts are either the people who are negotiating the contracts, or later on the judge and potentially a jury who are deciding a case, right? Mm-hmm. So to just sort of wrap up the point about revocability and things like that, that's a big contentious point right now. And that might be an area where a lot of litigation happens, if litigation ends up happening with this, is whether or not the Wizards is empowered to revoke this. And I think that a lot of this might not even matter until one D&D or the next edition of D&D comes out. Because when the next edition of D&D comes out, it's going to come out with its own system reference document. It's going to come out with its own SRD. And when it comes out with its own SRD, they don't have to put that new SRD under this license. They can put that SRD only under the next license. And you can't go to an old license for a new product necessarily, which is why they've updated the SRD updated the OGL with each edition of the SRD. And so while it may not be revocable necessarily, you may get boxed into using the new license when the new version comes out, if you want to make content for the new version, which is not a given. I mean, look at what happened with 4th edition. People didn't like 4th edition, moved on from D&D for a while, and that is why 5th edition came around so fast. So that's kind of a side tangent a little bit, but there's areas where revocability can be important. And it's going to specifically relate to making 5th edition content, which is the most popular version of D&D, right? There's been a huge boom of people playing D&D after the launch of 5th edition, and there's a huge boom of people making content for 5th edition because of how popular and how big of an audience there is. And that's where a lot of this money is, right? And so the terms of any new license coming down, Wizards is obviously going to have the drive to make it so that only people only use that version of the new license to create their content, because Wizards wants to have, it seems like from this new license that we're going to talk about in a minute, Wizards wants to have more control over what's made in the D&D space. The Wizards wants to have more control and more of like a veto over what happens to their property, right? And I think the real contentious issue that's going to come out of this is that revocation of the revocability of the OGL, whether or not people can still use the old versions when this new version comes out for 5th edition content. Because again, I think that's where a lot of the potential damages in the market drive is.
Right. And Nick, can I? What does what does the new OGL kind of like? What does it say? Like well, at least what leaked like.
Well, it says a lot. I mean, I have the leaked document. I've seen the whole thing. The original OGL is 900 words. The new OGL, the OGL 1.1 leaked version, is around 9,000, I believe. So it's a lot longer, and that's partially because it actually contains multiple different versions of a license that cover different situations. Right? They contemplated people who are making no money off of their products for Wizards making content, and they also contemplate the situation where someone's making a lot of money off of selling derivative content under the OGL. And that's kind of one of the areas where you can see this monetization mindset coming in. There's a couple of provisions that had the community up in arms. One of them was the fact that it purported to say that the 1.0 OGL was deauthorized and prior versions couldn't be used anymore, which had people up in arms from the beginning. There were two other provisions that were really, really strikingly upsetting to the community and surprising to lawyers, which was one. Well, not necessarily surprising to lawyers because I think we're all rather jaded, but really surprising to creators and really concerning to creators. And one of them is a license back provision. So that means is under the original OGL, you own all the content you create, and you don't give Wizards permission to use your content. It's yours forever, and no one gets to take it from you, right? Under the 1.1 OGL, there was a clause in the draft that said, when you create content under the OGL, you grant to Wizards of the Coast an irrevocable, perpetual, sub-licensable, royalty-free license. Essentially, you're giving Wizards what the OGL is giving you to the content you create.
So like you can use their shit, but they can also take your shit and use it without your
exactly. So like, say you put your blood, sweat, and tears into creating a module for D&D. If you create it with the OGL language in it, you have now magically given Wizards of the Coast not only a free royalty-free license agreement, you've given them a sub-licensable license agreement. So Wizards of the Coast can say, "Hey, I love this content. Other company, this content's great. You should make stuff with it." So not even Wizards is profiting off of it. Some third party has been sub-licensed to your content. People were up in arms about that because they thought Wizards was trying to steal their content. Now, they have said that was not what they were trying to do, but I can't think of another reason why you would do that.
Right.
It was a super onerous provision. The other problem was if you made more than $750,000 in a year selling content produced under the OGL in this new version, you have to pay 25% of the gross above $750,000. So the first dollar above $750,001, you have to pay 25 cents of that dollar. You have to pay 25 cents of every dollar after that point. If you make
gross is before like you
taxes before, right?
Yeah.
25% is more than a profit margin of a lot of publishing companies, right? 25% is a huge, like if you can make 25% in profit, that's a great day. And for Wizards to come through and say, hey, we're going to be a 25% expense for everything above 750K is really, really onerous. Right?
Well, now, and what else they did was they said that they could change it at any time without like warning. They could say, you know what? So it's like they could have somebody who, you know, there's this guy, he makes $3,000 off of something that uses OGL. Wizards can say, you know what? That's really great that you made that. Fun fact: it's no longer $750,000. Now it's, you know, $2,500. So now you owe me.
They wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. They can change it.
You get what I'm saying, right?
Right, but so like, let's say, you know, there's a bunch of Kickstarters planned. Right? They know a big wave of Kickstarters is coming out. They could, before those Kickstarters launch, they could say, okay, well, any crowdfunding goal that's met, we get, you know, 10% of that crowdfunding goal. If it happens before the Kickstarters launch, that under the provisions of OGL 1.0, it's possible that they could try to revert that because it happens before. Generally, you can't go backwards in time. You can't say, oh, the lease didn't say that, the license didn't say that when you did it, but it says that now, so I get to take your money, right? That doesn't, you don't guarantee. It's called relating back. You don't necessarily get to relate back in this kind of a context. But you're right that it is a huge problem because Wizards could change the royalty structure at any time without notice. With the only notice being, we'll publish updates on our website, right? Not needing to notify individuals. And speaking of notice, another huge difference between the OGL 1.1 and the OGL 1.0A is that in OGL 1.0A, you don't need to notify Wizards of your profits. You don't need to notify Wizards that you're even using the OGL. Yeah. You don't need to notify Wizards that you're making content. Under a 1.1, you're required to notify Wizards of your publication and notify Wizards that you're making money off of it. Which is huge,
right, which kind of gives them that heads up that they need.
Yeah,
you know, yeah,
right, yeah,
it's pretty awful
to make changes. Yeah, and the provisions of 1.1 are there's a lot in the new OGL leak that's like explanatory text, right? It's not all license provisions, that 9,000 words. There's a lot of explanatory text included in there to say, hey, this is why we're doing this. So clearly they had some understanding of how inflammatory this would be, right? Clearly they understood people are going to freak out about this and we need to give them a PR pitch. Because the whole first page of OGL 1.1 is like a PR pitch of saying, we believe in all these things. This is the purpose of this agreement. Yeah. This is the purpose of doing this. And it comes down to, they knew that they were making changes that people were going to be alarmed by, and they were trying to head it off at the pass, and it did not work because it was super alarming, and it's spawned a lot of community movement.
It's the response, backlash, and Hasbro's response. Sorry, the community response and backlash, and the Hasbro response to the community response and backlash is volumes different than what it was to MTG30, and I'd like to touch on that in a little bit. But before we move on to that, Compost, you had a point earlier that you brought up, something with Disney companies and Microsoft and game people who use the OG. I'm sorry, you had the question. It wasn't me. Something about companies that use the OGL like retroactively. Oh, like with Disney, they who still produces games like Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, like those used the SRD,
right?
And those are still sold today digitally. I mean, what are the legal repercussions of like Hasbro being like, "Hey, Disney, like, what's up with that?" Like, I want to know what could happen there.
Those are really interesting cases too, because it's kind of hard to predict that. And I want to touch on this a little bit on my own in terms of like sort of a separate thing you haven't really asked about in a second, but in terms of companies that published existing content, right? The new license agreement should not impact existing content, even if it gets reprinted or republished, because it already exists under OGL 1.0. So it's really hard for a company to go back and, be Darth Vader and say, I have altered the deal, pray I don't alter it further, right? With content that already exists. It's not impossible, but it's easier when there's a one-on-one direct, like you have a license to use this, like movie options, right? Somebody wants to buy the right to make a Lord of the Rings movie. They purchase the option to make that movie from the Tolkien estate, and that option is a negotiated license agreement. You can make this movie, but your option expires in 15 years. Or you have to make this movie before your option expires, or else the rights revert to us and you can't make the movie anymore. Right?
So I would be curious to see how the Tolkien estate would head up with Hasbro.
Right. But with a license that doesn't have a built-in renegotiation period, right? This is a perpetual license. A perpetual license, essentially, once you've built the content specifically, like we're in a gray area when you're talking about somebody who is actively developing content but hasn't published it. When you have something that's already been published under this license, I think it would be extraordinarily difficult for Wizards to raise any argument about saying, "Hey, you need to pay us royalties now after the fact," right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just not something that I think I don't think there's a legal vehicle to do that in this context. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a legal way to do that because it's essentially extortion. It's like, oh, yeah, your product did really well. We didn't have a license agreement before, but now we do, buddy, guy. The other thing that I wanted to touch on with this was the point that Legal Eagle raised, where he said that he doesn't think the OGL actually licenses anything of value, and that nobody who uses the OGL actually is beholden to Wizards of the Coast for it. I'm paraphrasing. It's an interesting legal argument, and it's rooted in contract law, and contract law. It's not contract. It's rooted in copyright law. So copyright law and trademark law are intellectual property rights, right? When you write a book or you make a piece of art, you have a copyright to that expression of the piece of art. But copyright very specifically does not protect ideas. It only protects expressions, right?
Right.
It protects The Hobbit as a written book, right? It protects the Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide or the Player's Handbook as an expression of the idea of Dungeons and Dragons, of the game. You can't copyright a system. This is codified into law, and it's related to an 1880 Supreme Court case where the court said basically what happened in this case. It's covered in Legal Eagle's video. It's a great video. But the case, an accountant
I'll link that video below, just FYI.
An accountant wrote out a book that had a method of bookkeeping in it. And another guy, a few years later, published essentially the same bookkeeping method in another book and made a lot more money than the first author did. And so the first author sued the second author for damages, essentially, because it's like, oh, you stole my idea. But the Supreme Court ruled, and then later when we had a Copyright and Trademark Act, it was codified into law, that a copyright does not protect a system or a game or rules or a mechanism. It only protects the expression of an idea. So he can't sue somebody for building the same system he built and publishing it in a book if they didn't directly copy the text in the way he described it, right? Because, and so in that vein, Legal Eagle's analysis of it was saying that, well, the rules of Dungeons and Dragons themselves are not copyrightable.
Right.
You can't copyright the rules for the board game Monopoly. The board game Monopoly, the name itself is both a copyright and a trademark. Right? They have copyright name
and like the characters or whatever.
Right. Yeah. The iconic characters of Monopoly, they are trademarked. Right. You can't use other people can't use those. And the characters themselves are also they're copyrighted. Their mannerisms, their characteristics, those are copyrighted, right? You can't copy that idea, that expression of an idea. But you could make Bobopoly as a board game, and so long as you're or make you could make I don't know capitalism for kids, the board game, and Capitalism for Kids is a board game where you travel around a board and you buy properties, and the properties will have special names, and you buy, et cetera, et cetera. You can essentially do what Monopoly does with all of its different versions on your own, like Star Wars Monopoly, all the different kinds of Monopoly. The only thing that makes them Monopoly is the fact that they have the trademarks left on them. The core,
right? That's that brand recognition, right?
Right. Yeah. And that's what's trademarkable, right? Trademark protects brand identity. It protects consumers from somebody putting a box of scalpels inside a Monopoly game and selling it as Monopoly, and then someone being surprised that there's a big box full of razor sharp knives that they bought, right? That is copyright. That's trademark infringement. You can't sell something as something else. You can't sell the Monopoly brand of razor blades, right? Because you don't own that trademark.
Right.
Same thing with D&D, right? You can publish a role-playing game that has exactly the same rules as D&D, and so long as you are not directly copying the player's handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide,
just call it Lizards and Basements.
Yeah.
Yes.
Or you know, or you can, and you even get more latitude for parodying it. If you're making a parody of Dungeons and Dragons, that's an exception from a lot of copyright and trademark restrictions. So you could parody it. If
you have to like just announce that it's a parody, right?
You
kind of like Spaceballs.
Well, actually, that's a tangent, but that's actually being litigated right now at the Supreme Court. There was a kid who made a parody Facebook page of a police station, and he got arrested by the police for making a parody Facebook page, and he got charged with a crime. He was acquitted, and now he's suing the police for arresting him for making a parody page. And The Onion wrote a brilliant amicus brief asking for the Supreme Court to grant certiorari to review this case because of how much there's a Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals decision that says parodists have to announce their parody. But in general, that's not true. It's not true everywhere. You don't always have to announce your parody. So that's actually being litigated right now. The issue of whether you need to announce it as a parody is being litigated right now. But to roll back to this question of whether or not I think one of the really interesting things that this whole OGL conversation has brought out is this idea of whether or not you need the OGL to make homebrew content, right? If you write out an adventure guide, right, that writes out a whole adventure path, and you don't reproduce anything that's in the SRD, in the system reference document, if you don't say I'm putting the Bard class in here, if you create a different class that functions very similarly to the Bard, but you don't actually use the language of the Bard class,
like you say, magic and musician or something like that,
right? Yeah. If you're not directly copying any content from the SRD, you're not actually licensing anything from Wizards of the Coast because you've created everything yourself out of whole cloth, and it's your copyright.
Right. Well, and that brings me to I think I remember when Paizo, and we'll touch on Paizo and the Orc in a few minutes. But I remember Paizo in one of their press releases, they're like, yeah, like second edition of Pathfinder like does not use OGL at all or something like that. Like it is completely standalone.
Well, and that's because Pathfinder is an entirely different game, right? It's similar in that it uses like similar dice shapes, right? It still uses D20s and things like that. But that's not copyrightable. You can't copyright a dice shape. You can't copyright you can patent an injection molding way to make a dice, but you can't copyright the shape. A shape is not a copyrightable.
What is the 20-sided shape? Sorry, I can't speak. Dodecahedron? Okay. Yeah. You can't copyright a dodecahedron.
I'm pretty sure that was it Euclid has the copyright on that shape from the mathematician Euclid, who I think theorized.
Only there's three people here, but only one of us has a degree in the classics, and that's not me or Campos. So
it took me 6 years to get my associates.
I never went to college.
But so Paizo is interesting too, because Paizo kind of did this, right? Paizo created Pathfinder. A lot of people who worked for Paizo, they started out publishing a magazine of adventure paths. That's where Pathfinder comes from. There's Pathfinder magazine, I believe. They were publishing under the OGL. They were publishing adventure guides for Dungeons and Dragons third and 3.5 editions. And then I think I could be wrong on the history here because I don't know all that much about Paizo. I know a lot more about Wizards of the Coast than Paizo, but I believe a lot of people who founded Paizo and work for Paizo, including up to right now, used to work for Wizards making D&D.
Well, yeah, there was a couple people from Paizo that were like, you can't revoke the OGL because we were there when you did it, like because they worked there. Yeah,
and Paizo, I believe Paizo's big split from Wizards was in the fourth edition Crisis, right? Wizards published 4th edition. They also tried to revoke the OGL when they published 4th edition. They didn't publish it under the OGL. They published it under something different. I don't even want to talk about it. It's a whole separate thing. But when the people at Paizo moved on from Wizards, they built Pathfinder, and it was very similar to the 3.5e edition of Dungeons and Dragons, because they saw that there was a market of people who were really disenfranchised from Wizards after they had this whole 4th edition fiasco. They built a new game that was very similar to what they wanted to do, and they moved on in that direction, right? And in 2019 is when they published 2nd edition, which is totally different. It works totally differently. It doesn't have like the same action economy. It has totally different things. It is not in any way related to the D&D 5e SRD, and it's not in any way related to 3.5 either. It's a whole new thing. And it does include the language for the OGL in the book, right? But the only reason they did that, which Paizo said this recently, the only reason they published it under the OGL was because it made it easier for third-party publishers to produce content, right? It's easier for somebody to produce content when there's a clear license agreement, so in case they accidentally cross over Wizards IP, they're not going to get sued, right? So it made it safer for third-party publishers. But Paizo said, we don't need it. We don't use it. It's not for us. We're not hurt by this at all. And then Paizo's gone on to be the GOAT out of the situation anyway.
I was about to say, so I'm gonna pull up a couple interesting things here. One I forgot to pull up. Paizo state blah 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 blah. Here we go. Okay. So released a statement. Here we go. Hold please. So for the internet and for you two, so when all of this controversy happened, when people were crazy up in arms at Wizards of the Coast from the D&D community, part of the and I don't mean like in any small part, but a large portion of like Dungeons and Dragons content creators, celebrities, players, personalities, whatever, all kind of came out being like, you know what, like we're gonna hit them where it hurts in their wallet. And this is going to be what I touch on in terms of Magic players versus D&D players, because we happen to be both. But in mass, there was a section, or not a section, a plethora of hashtags trending on Twitter. There was D&D Begone, kind of play on words of D&D Beyond. Because this whole situation started with somebody who works within Wizards of the Coast who sent an email to several creators and was basically like, hey, Wizards of the Coast measures their metrics, based on how many D&D Beyond subscriptions they have. So there was stop the sub, hashtag D&D Begone, and people started canceling
Open D&D too.
Oh yeah, hashtag
Open D&D started in December though, I believe. When there was first discussions about updating the OGL back in December of last year, that before the leak. Open D&D was the first hashtag that's associated with this that came out.
So I think sometime last week there was like at some point, I think it was when it hit like 24,000 people had like canceled their subscriptions. It was trending on Twitter. I'm going to read some statements here. So D&D at Wizards of the Coast released. There's two statements released by them. One statement released by Paizo between the two that I think really kind of made stuff happen even more. So the first one was, and this is a direct quote I'm reading directly from the D&D Beyond release. It says, when we initially conceived of revising the OGL, it was with three major goals in mind. And I should point out that there are several sources online that points out several different things in here that are inaccuracies, falsehoods, outright lies, gaslighting, things like that. People were really angry about this statement. It came off extremely tone deaf. I'm not a fan of it, to be honest. But when we initially conceived of revising the OGL, it was with three major goals in mind. First, we wanted the ability to prevent the use of D&D content from being included in hateful and discriminatory products. Second, we wanted to address those attempting to use D&D and Web3 blockchain games and NFTs by making clear that OGL content is limited to tabletop role-playing content like campaigns, modules, and supplements. And third, we wanted to ensure that the OGL is for the content creator, the home brewer, the aspiring designer, our players, and the community, not major corporations to use for their own commercial and promotional purpose. Driving these goals were two simple principles. One, our job is to be good stewards of the game, and two, the OGL exists for the benefit of the fans. Nothing about those principles has wavered for a second. This is why our early drafts of the new OGL included the provisions they did. The draft language was provided to content creators and publishers so their feedback could be considered before anything was finalized. In addition to the language allowing us to address discriminatory and hateful conduct and clarifying what types of products the OGL covers, our drafts included royalty language designed to apply to large corporations attempting to use OGL content. It was never our intent to impact the vast majority of the community. However, it's clear that from the reaction that we rolled a 1. It has become clear that it is no longer possible to fully achieve all 3 goals while still staying true to our principles. So here's what we're doing. The next OGL will contain provisions that allow us to protect and cultivate the inclusive environment we're trying to build and specify that it covers only content for TTRPGs. That means that other expressions such as educational and charitable campaigns, live streams, cosplay, VTT uses, etc., will remain unaffected by any OGL update. Content already released under 1.0a will also remain unaffected. What it will not contain is any royalty structure, because that was one of the big ones. It also will not include the license back provision, which is another big issue, that some people were afraid was a means for us to steal work. In my opinion, it was. That never crossed our minds. Under any new OGL, you will own the content you create, and we won't. Any language you put down will be crystal clear and unequivocal on that point. The license back language was intended to protect us and our partners from creators who incorrectly allege that we steal their work simply because of coincidental similarities. As we continue to invest in the game that we love and move forward with partnerships in film, television, and digital games, that risk is simply too great to ignore. The new OGL will contain provisions that address that risk, but we will do it without a license back and without suggesting we have the rights to the content you create. Your ideas and imagination are what makes this game special, and that belongs to you. A couple of last thoughts. First, we won't be able to release the new OGL today because we need to make sure we get it right, but it is coming. Second, you're going to hear people say, and here's the gaslighting part. Second, you're going to hear that people say that they won and we lost because making their voices heard forced us to change our plan. Those people will only be half right. They won and so did we. Our plan was to always solicit the input of our community before any update to the OGL. The drafts you've seen were attempting to do just that. We want to always delight fans and create experiences together that everyone loves. We realize that we did not do this this time, and we are sorry for that. Our goal was to get the exact type of feedback on which provisions worked and which did not, and which we ultimately got from you. Any change this major could have only been done well if we were willing to take that feedback, no matter how it was provided. So we are. Thank you for caring enough to let us know what works and what doesn't. That's what we need, and that's what scares you. Or sorry, what you need and what scares you. Without knowing that, we can't do our part to make the new OGL match our principles. Finally, we'd appreciate the chance to make this right. We love D&D's devoted players and the creators who take them on so many incredible adventures. We won't let you down. That was their initial statement. So a couple things in there that stood out, and a lot of people were angry about. The gaslighting of they're only half right. We won too. It was PR people, and that was a really bad PR choice. I don't know who okayed that. Sorry, and it looks like we're going to be going over the 2-hour mark, just FYI, which I'm fine with. Are you two still good to keep going?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I think then you can probably edit some of this down for time, right?
Yeah. So yeah, just going over this. I mean, the first thing was it wasn't a draft. This was sent out to like the guy who runs Kickstarter confirmed that he had to negotiate these prices because the royalty thing, because they sent it to him to sign and he said, no, I'm not going to sign this, and he had to negotiate down to 20% from 25 for Kickstarters. That's not something that you send. That's not a draft. That is something that's a contract.
Right.
Yeah, that's something that's been negotiated. That's a contract, sir. That's not
as a term of art. It technically is a draft because it's not the official version, right? In law, my practice, for instance, when I'm producing a document, it's always a draft until it's been signed. until it's been authorized and put in use. So as far as I'm aware, OGL 1.1 was never used and never will be used because it's been canned at this point. So it is technically a draft. I think they are leaning a little heavily on that technicality, though. I think you're right in that.
Yeah.
Well, this is
they were expecting it to be signed.
They were expecting to publish this that day, right? They were expecting to publish this 1.1 and push it to the community. And I think that it seems a little bit suspicious that he said, "Oh, we intended to have community feedback," but they had said that they were going to publish the new OGL that day. It's like, oh, I mean, okay.
Yeah, it seems like they're really tripping over themselves. A lot of babble and backtracking. Yeah,
right,
yeah. So
I was suspicious about that. Yeah,
it was. I think that it was done in bad faith. I think that a lot of it was done in bad faith. I think that they wanted a very different outcome. They wanted it to go under the radar.
Well, I think that statement, the statement. This is my third or fourth time reading this statement. I think the most telling part about that statement is that let me see here. So we wanted to address those attempting to use D&D and Web3 blockchain games and NFTs by making clear the OGL content limited tabletop gaming content like campaigns, modules, and supplements. And we wanted to ensure that the OGL is for the content creator, the home brewer, the aspiring designer, or players in the community, not major corporations, right? That shows the target, right? Those are all financial pieces, right? The target of this is clearly financially motivated. They're saying, we don't want somebody to be profiting off of our work, which has not been the case with the GL. Disney owns OGL properties, right? Big companies do own, the Tolkien estate has an OGL property, right? Big companies do own OGL properties under the past umbra of the OGL license. And I think somebody at Wizards has decided, hey man, we want a slice of that action for these big companies. And they created this 1.1 license that's like, okay, we're going to do, this is, before open license, it was for everybody. Now, this license is not for everybody. This is for businesses. And then the other part of the license is for everybody. But the delineation was not clear in the language of the license. The thing that separated, because there are probably small content creators who could hit it big and make more than $750,000 and then find themselves subject to royalties and have no way to deal with that with other revenue where other big companies could. So it was kind of like they are saying they care about the homebrew and the content creators, right? They're saying they want the license to be for them, but very clearly large sections of the license were written to be an FU to other companies, which is standard business practice, right? But like, you can't have a license that does both. I don't think. No. You can't have an open license that works for all people who want to avail themselves of the license, and then also stick it to your competition.
Right, and also it sounds like they wanted to get ahead on the Web3 blockchain because obviously, I mean, I know NFTs aren't doing so great now, but they wanted to have that opportunity if it does, that they would be the only one that would.
Yeah, be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Right. Well, so now I'm gonna jump forward a few days. So, a couple days later, excuse me, I'm trying to readjust myself, which I keep doing. So now at this point, a few days later, there's a confirmed like 35,000 D&D Beyond subscription cancellations, to the point where there was a thing going around where people could the website was either like bogged down with so many people, or the cancellation page was like hidden or hard to find, so people couldn't cancel their D&D Beyond subscriptions. I canceled mine. I was only paying like $3 a month or whatever, and I don't need unlimited characters. Sorry. So, I mean, saves me $3. But enough people did it to really catch Wizards' attention. But also Paizo, who we talked about, the producer of Pathfinder, put out a statement, and there's something in there that I'm going to ask Nate to explain a little bit. So I'm going to read the quote. This is from Paizo's website. For the last several weeks, as rumors of Wizards of the Coast's new version of the open game license began circulating among publishers and on social media, gamers across the world have been asking what Paizo plans to do in light of concerns regarding Wizards of the Coast's rumored plan to deauthorize the existing OGL 1.0A. We have been awaiting further information, hoping that Wizards would realize that for more than 20 years, the OGL has been a mutually beneficial license which should not and cannot be revoked. While we continue to await an answer from Wizards, we strongly feel that Paizo can no longer delay in making our own feelings about the importance of open gaming a part of the public discussion. We believe that any interpretation of the OGL 1.0 or 1.0a were intended to be revocable or able to use, or sorry, any interpretation that the OGL 1.0 or 1.0a were intended to be revocable or be deauthorized is incorrect with good reason. We were there. Paizo owner Lisa Stevens and Paizo president Jim Butler were leaders on the Dungeons & Dragons team at Wizards at the time. Brian Lewis, co-founder of Azora Law, the intellectual property firm that Paizo uses, was the attorney at Wizards who came up with the legal framework for the OGL itself. Paizo has also worked very closely with OGL-related issues with Ryan Dancy, the visionary who conceived the OGL in the first place. Paizo does not believe that the OGL 1.0a can be, quote, deauthorized, unquote, ever. While we are prepared to argue that point in a court of law if need be, we don't want to have to do that, and we know that many of our fellow publishers are not in a position to do so. We have no interest whatsoever in Wizards' new OGL. Instead, we have a plan that we believe will irrevocably and unquestionably keep alive the spirit of the open game license. As Paizo has evolved, the parts of the OGL that we ourselves value have changed. When we needed to quickly bring out Pathfinder First Edition to continue publishing our popular monthly adventures back in 2008, using Wizards' language was important and expeditious. But in our non-RPG products, including our Pathfinder Tales novels, Pathfinder Adventure card game, and others, we shifted our focus away from D&D tropes to lean harder into ideas that were from our own writers. By the time we went to work on Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Wizards of the Coast's open gaming license or open game content was significantly less important to us, and so our designers and developers wrote a new edition without using Wizards' copyrighted expressions of any game mechanics. While we still published it under the OGL, the reason was no longer to allow Paizo to use Wizards' expressions, but to allow other companies to use our expressions. So that's what we were saying earlier, that Pathfinder 2nd Edition does not have OGL. We believe that we always have, as we always have, that open gaming makes games better, improves profitability for all involved, and enriches the community of gamers who participate in this amazing hobby. And so we invite gamers from around the world to join us as we begin the next great chapter of open gaming with the release of a new open, perpetual, and irrevocable open RPG creative license. So the Open RPG Creative License, aka the ORC license. The new Open RPG or the new ORC license will be built, system agnostic for independent game publishers under the legal guidance of Azora Law, an intellectual property firm that represents Paizo and several other game publishers. Paizo will pay for this legal work. We invite game publishers worldwide to join us in support of this system agnostic license that allows all games to provide their own unique open rules, reference documents that open up their individual game systems to the world. To join this effort, please provide feedback on the drafts of this license, and then there's a little hyperlink there. In addition to Paizo, Kobold Press, Chaosium, Green Ronin, Legendary Games, Rogue Genius Games, and a growing list of publishers that have already agreed to participate in the ORC license. And in the coming days, we hope to expect to add substantially to this group. The ORC will not be owned by Paizo, nor will it be owned by any company who makes money publishing RPGs. Azora Law's ownership of the process and stewardship should be able to provide a safe harbor against any company being bought or sold or changing management in the future and attempting to rescind the rights or nullify sections of the license. Ultimately, we plan to find a nonprofit with a history of open source values to own this license, such as the Linux Foundation. It kind of goes on from there to talk about how important that stuff is. But I mean, there's some really big points to bring out there. And this is what I think the straw that broke the camel's back for Wizards of the Coast is they themselves lost a fuck ton of business.
Right.
And I don't mean like a little bit of a market share, but I mean like.
And before I put my lawyer hat on with this topic, right? I'm gonna take my lawyer hat off, and I'm gonna put on my homebrewer hat, right? I've been homebrewing a setting for 6 years now, longer technically because it's based out of a novel I wrote for NaNoWriMo in I think 2016 or 2015, right? So it's a long-term thing that I've been building, and I was originally planning to publish it under the OGL. ORC baby, I'm going to be publishing. I'm going to be publishing under the ORC because I don't necessarily want this to be limited to a single game. I've found as our party has leveled up that the D&D kind of tends to start to break down at high levels. Like the encounters are really much harder to balance, and I know that Pathfinder is actually a lot better at that than D&D 5e is. So I was already considering, not having a second campaign in D&D 5e, exploring a different option once we finish this one. And I think that if I'm going to publish the thing that I'm developing, the thing I've been working on for 6 years, it's not going to be under the OGL. It's going to be under it's going to be under the orc. It's going to be under the open RPG creative license, because
right,
they hit it on the head. Right. We have no interest whatsoever in Wizards' new OGL. I think I'm in the same boat with Paizo, right? As a creator, as somebody who creates content for the game, even if they put out a new OGL 1.1, 2.0, whatever, that has none of the license back provisions, none of the provisions that say, oh, we're not going to have a license to your content, and that's none of the royalty provisions, it's still going to be a different document. They're still saying we're going to put out a new document that's different from the OGL 1.0. It's not as open. It's more restrictive. It's the purpose of this document that they're putting out, as they said in their statement, is to restrict the kinds of things OGL content could be used for, which is not the spirit of the OGL. The spirit of the OGL was was to create a collaborative community of people who are making content for D&D. And if they're saying that the purpose of the OGL is anything other than that, it's a changed document, and I really don't want any part of it. And I'm on the same page with Paizo. So that's my 2 cents as a D&D creator. I agree. Not want a part of the OGL. Any new OGL, if it's not essentially exactly the same as OGL 1.0A, I'm out. I'm done. I don't want that.
Yeah. I will say that I myself will likely continue playing 5e, but it's because I run a game for 4 kids and 2 adults, or 3 kids and 2 adults, sorry. And I know that system back and forth. It is natural to me, but what I can say is I'm not sure if I'm going to financially support Wizards of the Coast in terms of Dungeons and Dragons stuff going forward.
Yeah.
I just don't
for the
see any
of business. It's the same thing, right? You can still,
right,
if you're only using stuff you've already like. I don't think I'll stop using the supplements that I've purchased. I have a whole shelf full of D&D supplements.
Oh yeah,
I buy all of the LGS covers.
All D&D. All of this is all D&D.
I buy all of the LGS covers of every up to this point. I bought the LGS covers, the local game store covers of every D&D publication that's been released since I started really getting into the homebrew aspect of D&D gaming. I have all of those all those LGS covers.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'll buy another one.
I don't know if I will ever want to buy another one either. I think that
I don't know that when they pull out this open one D&D not shenanigans, I don't know if I want to buy that. Right?
Yeah.
I think the only thing I may actually end up buying moving forward are minis. They might have because WizKids minis are great, and other than that, I might just 3D print minis.
I would like to point out that our friend Campos up here just recently purchased a 3D printer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to reference something about what Paizo said. Also, just going back.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if anyone got that Linux reference. Legit. I loved it.
No, it's true. And if you look into Brian Lewis as well, he's actually Brian Lewis is the guy who wrote the OGL. He's the attorney. He used to be Wizards in-house counsel. He now runs Ozora Law. He has a partnership. It's a law firm doing IP law in Seattle. Seattle is actually a very big locus for IP law, and the reason for that is we have a lot of big companies that deal with IP in Seattle in Seattle here. We have people like Microsoft. We have Bungie. We have other big game developers in Seattle. We've got Wizards of the Coast. These are all people who are
they're here.
We are all in the United States. There's a lot of people who are at the cutting edge of. I think one of the only places where there's probably more IP law being dealt with besides I think the three big locuses, and I could be wrong because I'm not an IP lawyer directly, but I think the three big locuses of IP law are like Seattle, New York, and LA, because of all the movie and film business, right? I had an IP law professor when I was in law school who had worked in his job. He cut his teeth in IP negotiating movie option contracts for big companies like HBO, Showtime, and then he moved up to Seattle and he helped write licensing agreements for big companies like Microsoft. So we have a lot of licensing stuff here, and Brian Lewis was really at the forefront of IP law when he did the OGL, because again, he did this before the Creative Commons, which is a huge IP law thing these days, where you're having so much of the Creative Commons. And the Linux Foundation is also a big part of this whole conversation, because the Linux company has been doing this for a long time. Or not Linux company, the Linux Foundation is doing this for a long time. Linux is, I think, foundational to the idea of having an open license, right? They're foundational to the idea of having something that is open and available for free, and not, you don't have to, it's open source, right? The idea of open source is almost inextricably linked to the Linux Foundation.
So I'd like to touch on the final statement from Wizards of the Coast. So this is the silly thing. So they put out that first tone deaf fuck you statement.
Mm-hmm.
People keep continually canceling their subscriptions. They're at 36,000 people canceling. Last I checked, it could be more now. I don't know. But I mean, that has got to equate to several hundred thousand and millions of dollars. I mean, enough to stress them out. So I can't think that it would have been less than a couple $1 million. Right. And so then Paizo puts out that thing. They were like, hey, us and every other major company that was using your products and stuff are now moving to something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So they're losing a huge market share. They're bringing a ton of people, they've driven a ton of people away from them. So they finally released this morning, 13 hours ago, this morning. And I feel bad for this guy. So it starts off with, hi, I'm Kyle Brink, the executive producer on D&D. I feel bad because I feel like he's being used as a scapegoat here. He is brand new to Wizards of the Coast. Like, he's been there for like 6 months or something or less. The guy who was handling D&D before left in like September, October, something like that. Yeah, October. Yeah. I don't remember what the deal was there. There's a video on it, but I got to watch it. But anyways, so hi, I'm Kyle Brink, the executive producer on D&D. It's my team that makes the game we all play. D&D has been a huge part of my life long before I worked at Wizards, and will be for a long time after I'm done. My mission, and that of the entire D&D team, is to help bring everyone the creative joy and lifelong friendships that D&D has given us. These past days and weeks have been incredibly tough for everyone. As players, fans, and stewards of the game, we can't and we won't let things continue like this. I'm here today to talk about a path forward. First, let me start with an apology. We are sorry we got it wrong. That's really all that they ever needed to say. That's what I wish they would say about Magic, but like, I will say that it is nice to get a somewhat genuine apology, but like, I think it's a little too late at this point for a lot of people, including myself. But okay, at least you said it. Our language and requirements in the draft OGL were disruptive to creators and not in support of our core goals of protecting and cultivating an inclusive play environment, and limited the OGL to TTRPGs. Then we compounded things by being silent for too long. We hurt fans and creators, and when more frequent and clear communications could have prevented so much of this. Starting now, we're going to do this a better way, more open and transparent, with our entire community of creators, with the time to iterate, to feedback, and to improve. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's how we do it for the game itself. So let's do it the way the for the OGL 2. Let's do it that way for the OGL 2. We'll listen to you, and we will share with you what we've heard, much like we do in our Unearthed Arcana and 1D&D playtests. This will be a robust conversation before we release any future version of the OGL. Here's what to expect. On or before Friday 20th, we'll share the new proposed OGL documentation for your review and feedback, much as we do with playtest material. So it sounds like they're going to post it publicly. After you review the proposed OGL, you will be able to fill out a quick survey, much like Unearthed Arcana playtest feedback surveys. It will ask you specific questions about the document and include open form labels to share any other feedback you have. The survey will remain open for at least 2 weeks and will give you advance notice before it closes so that everyone who wants to participate can complete the survey. Then we will compile, analyze, react, and present back what we heard from you. Finally, you deserve some stability and clarity. We are committed to giving creators both input into and room to prepare for any update to the OGL. Also, there's a ton of stuff that isn't going to be affected by an OGL update. So today, right now, we'll lay out all the areas that this conversation won't touch. Any changes to the OGL will have no impact on at least these creative efforts. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but your video content, your accessories, for your own content, non-published works, for instance, contracted services, VTT content, DM's Guild content, your OGL 1.0A content, your revenue, your ownership of your content. That's all from me now. You'll hear from us again on or before Friday as described above, and we will look forward to this conversation. Kyle Brink. So, I think that they tried something that was a little shitty, little shady, little sneaky, thought that they'd get away with it, if it wasn't for you meddling kids, and in this case, you meddling content creators and players. And it's silly because I heard somebody say, how are you about to think that a community of rules lawyers are dumb? It's the wrong community to mess with.
It's and I like this update a lot personally. It still does not inspire any confidence in this whole plan to revoke the OGL. I agree with Paizo. I don't think you can. It's not going back to the whole issue of whether it can be revoked or deauthorized. No, I don't think so. I mean, again, maybe with respect to future published content, obviously that's a different thing. But I agree with Paizo in that I don't necessarily think that they can just unilaterally deauthorize this license. I don't know that you can do that with something that was published as an open and perpetual license with no provisions within it to deauthorize it. And the things that they say in here, they're saying essentially that they're going to steamroll forward with publishing a new non-optional version of the OGL. And under prior editions of the OGL, every new version was optional. You could go back to a different version of the OGL that you liked better. Although I think they're all very similar in terms of they dealt with different versions of the SRD, but they were all very similar in terms of the license they provided and the terms of that license. And so to talk about, we're now going to come out with a new OGL that totally changes the landscape and is not optional. You have to use this one for everything moving forward, except existing already published content. I don't think that plan is going to work for them. I don't think that if they're seeking to enforce the new OGL over over something that's published under 5e, I don't know how well it's going to go for them. I think that's going to be a really interesting legal battle that comes out because I don't think it's going to go their way. And also, the other thing that really strikes me about the statement is they're still saying your ownership of your content, you'll continue to own your content with no license back requirements. I don't know that a license back requirement in this context would necessarily be enforceable. Again, relating this back to the copyrightability of the what they're publishing under the SRD, right? If you're not just carbon copying the SRD, I don't know that you need their license to do what you're doing. So it's good that they're clarifying the ownership, but again, I really don't know whether or not a lot of content is produced. I've seen a lot of people on Twitter talking about how corner cases where it's like, well, it's easier for me to, in my publication, to reproduce sections of the SRD for convenience for my readers. I don't want to have my readers having to go back to the SRD material, or go back to their PHP to reference what haste means or reference what these keywords mean. But I think it's still a very interesting area of law to discuss whether or not that's copyright infringement without the OGL or not. And I don't know whether that's something Wizards would litigate unless there's a lot of money on the line, because again, that's where litigation comes from. But I really think that this document or this statement definitely strikes a better tone, right? This is much better written, but that tone is kind of a day late and a dollar short. They didn't release this when the controversy was happening. They were silent for like a full week. This statement itself came out almost a full week, like 5 to 6 days.
They're very good at just not saying anything.
Yeah,
they're notoriously good at it.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think this is evidence that despite the community backlash, they're not abandoning this idea of reproducing and redoing the OGL, right? They're not abandoning the idea of publishing a new OGL. They're adamant that they need a new one to do different things, which means that the ideas of the company have changed, right? The ideas of the company behind this license have changed, which it just illustrates why we need the orc, right? We need the orc because the orc is going to be an independent, non-affiliated license that allows us to do what we did under the OGL, and even more because it's system agnostic. It's not.
Well, and I really love that they're giving it to a nonprofit foundation that has a history of like open licensing, so that not one gaming corporation can own it and do shit like this. Like I think that
so if Paizo got bought in 15 years by Mattel, and Mattel's like, you know what, Hasbro, you know what, fuck you, Hasbro. I'm gonna build my own empire, and I'm going to monetize the shit out of Pathfinder, right? That can't happen with the orc, because if they're going to license everything under the orc, then, and it's not owned by Paizo, even if Paizo gets bought by an evil tyrannical corporation or whatever, what have you, it's going to stay.
I really like that, and I'm very curious, and I don't want to speculate on this, but I'm just based on what I've already seen, I am very curious to see what the financial repercussions are going to be against Hasbro and WOTC for this fiasco. Because I mean, like, a lot of people are like, "Oh, it's just big business, corporate America." No, but this is a fiasco. This is not good for them. I mean, their stock price again has dropped considerably over the last several months. Half of their community is enraged. I mean, like, to the point where they actually had to outright just be like, we were wrong, we're sorry, like, and make a full-on public apology like that. Like, you know, something that's interesting that I've been wanting to talk about is the chasm of difference between how Dungeons and Dragons players and Magic the Gathering players have been treated. And I've seen a couple of videos on this. I was watching Rudy, I think, from Alpha Investments, where this shit happened with D&D, and the entire D&D community all at once was just like, no, how about not? And they immediately canceled their subscriptions. Any form of revenue that they were getting for D&D was just gone, and it freaked out WotC, and they had to apologize to the D&D community. The Magic community is like, no, Wizards, you're bad for doing XYZ or XYZ. Here's some money for this product. We're really angry at you, and this is really shitty of you. Here's some money for this most recent product. Hey, Wizards!
I have a theory.
Let's hear it.
I bet Alpha Investments had discussed this too. My theory is that the D&D community is focused on a singular product and is doing essentially a singular thing. There's not really a collector's market for D&D. There's not really a market for, like, some of the editions of the rule books have some collector's value, obviously, but that's not a core part of the Dungeons and Dragons experience. The core part of the Dungeons and Dragons experience is playing Dungeons and Dragons, and that's what D&D sells, right? There are not as many finance people in the D&D space, and so you have a much more unified voice, because we're drawn together by the D&D community by a love of TTRPGs and D&D specifically. We all love this game. We obviously have very strong feelings about this game. And when you mess with the way we interact with this game, we have reactions, right? And we also there's a little bit more leverage over Wizards, because D&D Beyond is very much not necessary to engage in the hobby, right? I own two copies. Well, I own a copy of every one of those published books already. I've already given them my money. I buy all of my accessories from third parties. I don't buy accessories from Wizards. The only thing I buy from Wizards is WizKids models, and even then, I'm kind of leaning more towards 3D printed models anyway, because I think they have a higher print fidelity.
We have compost for that now.
So at the end of the day, right, we have, because D&D Beyond is not necessary to pursuing the hobby, right? Because D&D Beyond is not necessary. It's a luxury that we can say, hey, we're just not going to pay for that anymore, because fuck you, that's why. Whereas with Magic, right, we want to keep playing Magic. We still got to kind of buy into the hobby, right? We could proxy all we want. We can do Control P on the image files and
printer go burr.
Printer go burr. But if we want that premium cardboard, we got to give WOTC money. We got to
Luxury
give the
cardboard
WOTC money.
rectangles. Yeah.
Right. And the other aspect too is that while D&D's community is not a monolith, it's much more monolithic in its interests than I think the MTG community is, right? You have MTG finance bros who are just about MTG finance. They are only about how the value of the cards and the stonks. You have other people in MTG who don't give a shit about the expensive cardboard. They don't buy cards worth more than $1. They only buy singles. They are just here to play the game with their friends, and they only care about that. And then you have people who are somewhere, or like myself, I'm somewhere in between. I have things I really like to collect. I really like the Devil Masters box toppers, right? I like those a lot. I'm trying to collect those. That's my collecting bent for Magic right now. I am not just a collector. I'm not just a player. I'm both. But I don't always get offended by the things that some people get offended by. Like when hardcore collectors get offended by, MTG30, right? I wasn't really offended by MTG30. I just thought it was a bad product and a bad idea, and I knew I wasn't going to buy it. And I think that's the mindset with MTG you could take. Is some products aren't for you, right? Some products are for the whales, the investors, the collectors. Some products aren't for you.
Yeah. Well, as they had a guy, I can't remember what his position, but there was a guy on a live stream who was just like, yeah, just engage in the products that you want, and if you don't want it, then don't buy it, which a lot of people were upset about. And like I get it. Like I can understand and like verbalize and like articulate why these folks feel this way. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, just, you know what? Like, I'm not going to buy MTG 30th anniversary edition because I don't have $1,000 to spend on a chance. If it was a guaranteed Black Lotus, I would have done it no problem.
Right. Well,
but
compare MTG 30 with Collector's Edition, right? Collector's Edition was released in 1995, and it was like essentially a fat pack. It was a bundle box, right? That had one of every card from the limited run in a non-tournament legal card back. That's what people are comparing this to, right? And that was $40. You pay $40 for a guaranteed Black Lotus, a guaranteed Tropical Island, a guaranteed, et cetera, go down the list, right? And now you're talking about pay triple that, quadruple that for way more than that. You're paying $250. It's $250 per pack, right?
Yeah.
So you're paying You're paying quintuple that for one pack of 15 cards for a chance to get a Black Lotus. For a bad chance, by the way, to get a Black Lotus.
Oh yeah, there was a few odds calculators online that were like, yeah, you'd have to spend like $40,000.
You wonder how much it said I had to spend to get one Black Lotus? $95,000.
Yeah, see, the cheapest I got was $40,000, but at that, like, you could buy the collector's edition Black Lotus from 1995 for like $4,000. Right. Like I would rather do that, instead of In any case, it's interesting that the retro frame Black Lotus now is selling just as much as the collector's edition, though. That is a concerning thing because I think the collector's edition then might see a drop in value. We'll have to wait and see. But anyways, we're coming up on 2.5 hours, guys. Are there any like just closing thoughts or points or anything that you two want to like touch on before we get out of here?
I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the situation develops with the Orc, right? Because the Orc is new territory, right? We don't know anything about what the provisions are going to be. It's all brand new. I mean, I'm on that mailing list. I'm in a Discord server of lawyers talking about this stuff. It's all developing. Maybe we'll do an update episode later on with the new developments and things like that. It's all developing areas of law, right? I don't have any definitive answers on any of this stuff. I think it's pretty likely that WOTC kind of stepped in it here, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see where the fight happens, right? Because I've talked a lot today. We've all talked a lot today about what they can and can't do, which obviously that's speculative because I don't think it's settled what we call settled law. It's not something that we have a definitive. This case says this exact thing, and you can't do it because, again, open game license is not necessarily something super litigated. Because it was designed to prevent litigation. It was designed so that people could build things without worrying about WOTC suing them for it, right? I think it's gonna be really interesting to see where this fight happens, because it seems like everybody's spoiling for a fight, right? Paizo's up in arms and everybody's up in arms, and Paizo directly said in a statement, "We'll take this to court. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
Catch these hands. How about that?" Right? Like,
let me
yeah, and that's, I mean, and the really sad thing is that we had to get to this point, right? Like, this isn't necessary. You could just not, like, you don't have to do it. But I think the really telling thing is that WOTC is saying the protecting our IP from these big companies making money off of it is more important than giving peace of mind to our creators. And I think that's where the fight is going to be, whether it's in actually a legal scenario or if it's going to be in. And I think the interesting thing is that you are playing with the rights of large companies here, right? And large companies are just going to take it lying down that they no longer have the right to use this thing that they've been using. I can't imagine that large companies that are making money off of OGL properties are going to say, "Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah, new OGL 1.1, pay you 25% of the gross? Sure. Yeah. No problem. I like that idea." No.
I cannot imagine Disney or, fucking the Tolkien estate, kind of like what we talked about, like even like Microsoft and Xbox and all that, Sony. Yeah. I can't see any of them just being like, "Oh, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah, it's fine."
It's fine. Yeah. Well, and the other thing too that's going to come out, it would be really interesting. And I think this is the idea that a copyright can't copyright a system or it can't copyright a game or rules or a mechanical thing. Like, that's really well settled law. Like, it's very clear that that's true. Yeah. So this idea of is the SRD even like a copyrightable thing? Are the rules? We know that the rules of Dungeons and Dragons, you can't copyright those. Someone can make a clone of Dungeons and Dragons and sell it for profit, and so long as they didn't directly copy, I don't think that they're going to be in trouble like that, because as long as they remove all of the trademarkable, copyrightable things out of it, right, and purge it of that and put their own spin on it, it's not necessarily derivative work. And I think that idea could very, as legal brought up and stuff like that, it could very easily be litigated out of this, because someone, the scenario that I'm envisioning, right, is, let's say a creator uses OGL 1.0a and it doesn't adopt this new thing and publish something for 5e that's super successful, makes a lot of money, and Wizards is like, "Well, you didn't use our authorized license, so we're going to sue you to get for violating our copyright, or violating our license agreement." And it's going to come down to, I think, my theory of what's going to come down to are, A, whether or not they can actually revoke the 1.0a, which I think is definitely not an open and shut thing. They're treating it like they can just do it because they can. But I agree with Paizo. I don't think that conversation is actually over. I think that's something that needs to be litigated. It would need to be litigated before it's settled. And then B, whether or not this person actually needed the OGL and the SRD to make their content. I think that's going to be a really interesting area of developing conflict in this scenario. Whether or not
I think that what I am seeing before me in front of my eyes, I think that I am seeing the slow motion implosion of Wizards of the Coast under the weight of Hasbro and their need for revenue and income. I have seen, in the trading card market specifically, there are, while Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh aren't necessarily in the same region as Magic the Gathering is, so they're not necessarily worried about Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh. Like, it's a totally different like play set, play style, whatever. You have games like, I sound like a fucking broken record here, but Flesh and Blood has taken a significant market share from Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering. There are people flocking to that game, dropping Magic the Gathering for it. It is refreshing. It is fun. The card art is beautiful. It's investable. People love it. Same thing with new and up and coming games like Sorcery Contested Realm or Cryptic, which is a game developed by an entire community of like 1,000 people. Went on Kickstarter, did like $2 million, something like that. Like, it was insane. Same thing with Sorcery Contested Realm, and Legend Story Studios and good old Flesh and Blood it has found a very special place in my heart, where I'm at the point where I'm wanting days where I just play Flesh and Blood and don't even touch Magic, and the same thing now I can see happening with the Orc and all these reputable game publishers who have been using the OGL now just being like, nope, going to the Orc. So I think that what we're witnessing is the slow implosion of Hasbro and WOTC, and I'm curious to see where it all lands. But having said that, we're coming up on 2 hours and 40 minutes. I'm gonna make last call. Nate, you've talked, I've chatted. Campos, any closing thoughts for you, my friend?
It's definitely something we want to watch closely, and hopefully later on we can, once the dust settles and we see the aftermath, maybe we can just take again, Nate.
Yeah,
we'll have to do a temperature check. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Nate, thank you so much for just taking the last almost 3 hours and just like chatting with us, giving us your legal insight and understanding, because we don't understand all that stuff. So thank you for talking to us and doing the research to just kind of be here with us. Internet, if you guys want to follow Nate, you can find him on his @ here. He's at Dragons Horde, or Dragons_Horde. He's pretty cool. He does a lot of Magic and Pokemon stuff. If you want to follow Campos, he's Dead End Theory. Although I don't think he posts too much nerdy stuff on Instagram, but he's cool. You can talk to him. And then you guys know me, all about aesthetics. And then you guys know me. I'm always on Instagram. If anybody ever wants to hit me up, make sure you talk. Nate and Campos, I'm gonna put you guys out. I'm gonna say fare thee well to the internet, and I'll chat with you guys in just a minute. All right. All right. Thank you both. I appreciate you guys. Okay. Internet, thank you so much for sitting with us or listening to us while you're driving, or listening to us while you were letting somebody yell at you and let them think that you were listening. Anyways, thank you so much. That was a really great first episode to be back in. I really appreciate all of you guys who stuck through to the end. We're gonna get back on posting every Saturday, so make sure that you are sticking around, paying attention. Hit that like button, subscribe, hit the bell, comment, share with your friends, show your mom, whatever. But thank you so much. It's good to be back. It feels good to be back. I appreciate you, and I will see you guys next Saturday.